Hey guys, tonight we drift back to a time when the streets of Delhi weren't choked with traffic, but echoed with the sharp trot of war horses, whispered secrets, and the scent of sandalwood smoke curling through the palace air. You're not in a storybook tonight. You're in the throne-shadowed chambers of medieval India. Just before a man named Lost Khilgi seizes history by the throat. The year is 1296. The night is stiflingly warm, thick with the smell of rosewater and tension. You slip through the crowded alleyways of Delhi, your bare feet brushing against the packed earth, still warm from the day's sun. A faint hum of drums thuds in the background, growing louder. Somewhere behind you, a group of drunk nobles laugh too loudly, but you move toward the torchlit walls of Siri Fort, where something colder than ambition is brewing. Above you, on a balcony wrapped in brocade and paranoia, a man peers down at his uncle's court. He's young, wiry, and sharp as a razor. Lost Khilji. He's been watching, calculating, and he's had enough of waiting. You wouldn't know it from his lavish robes, or that smug tilt of the head. But Aladdin wasn't born a king. He clawed his way to the top, rising through the mud of military service and bureaucratic obedience under his uncle, Sultan Jalaluddin Hildi, a kind but dangerously trusting ruler. Aladdin had charmed his way into the royal family by marrying Jalaluddin's daughter. Sweet, right? Oh, but you probably won't survive this if you expect sentiment to survive either. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, post your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing where my sleepy little army is tuning in from now. Dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Aladdin isn't like other men. He doesn't crave the throne for its silks or its feasts. He wants power the way a drowning man wants air. For years, he's played the loyal nephew, all bowed heads, and yes, but tonight, he'll stab his way out of the shadows. You arrive just in time to witness it. The royal camp is pitched near Kara, a minor outpost on the Ganges River. Jalaluddin, always too trusting, has come to visit Aladdin to celebrate a military victory. There's music, fruit platters stacked like pyramids, and a tent so gold it looks like it's been dipped in sunlight. You shuffle behind a tapestry, heart pounding, as Aladdin approaches the Sultanate with a sword drawn, but with a hug. Yes, a hug. And then steel flashes. Jalaluddin gasps, eyes wide with disbelief, and crumples to the ground in a pool of irony. You'd think that'd be enough, but Aladdin makes sure. A few stabs, quick, mechanical, and suddenly, the kind old sultan is no more than a stain on a silk carpet. This isn't just a murder. It's a message. You retreat as the camp erupts in panic. Horses rear, servants scream, and somewhere in the distance, the Ganges rolls on indifferent, ancient, and bloodthirsty. Aladdin wastes no time claiming the throne. He doesn't wait for consensus or counsel. He storms into Delhi, not with apologies, but with promises of a stronger empire, a richer capital, and Mongol-proof borders. And Delhi, ever the tired romantic, lets itself be seduced again. Historians still argue whether Aladdin had long planned this coup or simply acted on a sudden surge of ambition, but one thing is clear. He didn't blink, and he never looked back. His first move as Sultan is surprisingly modern. No mass executions, no citywide lockdowns. Instead, he throws a giant celebration. Fireworks, elephants dressed like kings, free food for a week. You wander through the crowd, grabbing a warm piece of spiced flatbread from a street vendor who whispers, "He may be a murderer, but at least he's our murderer now," and it works. People forget Jalaluddin's body was barely cold. Aladdin isn't stupid. He knows Delhi needs to want him on the throne, so he builds his power not just through fear, but spectacle. Think Game of Thrones, but with better jewelry. But not everyone is fooled. In the quiet corners of the palace, old ministers shake their heads. Whispers snake through the marble halls. He won't last. Too young, too ruthless. Even his own wife, yes, the daughter of the man he killed, retreats into sullen silence. Family dinners must be delightful. Still, tightens his grip. He replaces officials with loyalists, reorganizes tax systems, starts building a network of informants so deep that even a sneeze in the provinces reaches his ears by morning. One fringe rumor, almost too strange to believe, tells of pigeons trained to carry secret messages between spies and the Sultan himself. Historians tend to dismiss this as courtly gossip. Hey, it does sound like something he'd try. You're not even halfway through your cup of warm goat milk when another decree is issued. All wine drinking banned, gambling banned, public dancing banned, unless it's directly praising the Sultan. This guy really is trying to play both Netflix villain and health coach, but underneath the strict laws and pageantry, something unsettling is rising. Aladdin isn't ruling like a man. He's ruling like a shadow, always present, always watching. Tonight, you lie in a commoner's home, listening to the wind push against the shutters. Outside, patrolmen's boots echo like thunder. Somewhere in the distance, the muezzin calls to prayer, calm and unwavering. But the city doesn't sleep easy anymore. There's a new wind blowing through Delhi, and it smells like sweat, blood, and ambition. You're standing at the edge of something strange now. Delhi smells different, like newly crushed sandalwood, and metal sharpened, just a little too often. It's been only weeks since Aladdin Khilgi took the throne, and yet the city feels like it's holding its breath, waiting to see what kind of king this young, ambitious, murder-tainted ruler will become. Let's just say, he doesn't disappoint. Tonight, you're summoned, though not by name, of course. No, you're just another invisible body swept into the folds of the imperial palace, as Aladdin begins remaking the world in his image. But trust me, once you see what's coming, you'll wish you weren't on the guest list. By candlelight and whispers, Aladdin starts his empire's reinvention with a lesson he's learned too well. Trust is a weakness. It got his uncle Jalaluddin killed, and it's not a mistake he plans to repeat. So he drafts his rule, not in ink, but in blood, silence, and paranoia. First, the royal household. The palace is swept clean of anyone remotely loyal to the old sultan. Servants vanish. Guards are reassigned, often to posts they never return from. You see an old vizier, beard trembling, escorted from the hall with all the dignity of a chicken being led to a butcher. The new regime is subtle, like a brick through a stained glass window. One evening, you pass through the Durbar hall, and there's a scene you won't forget. A eunuch, kneeling with his forehead touching the stone floor, shaking. Before him, Aladdin sits in a carved sandalwood chair, absently rubbing a ruby ring with his thumb. You lied, the Sultan says softly, almost bored. The room is silent. A pigeon coos from somewhere in the rafters. Do you know what happens? When someone lies to me, the eunuch doesn't answer. Neither do I, Aladdin continues, because it won't happen again. Then he gestures, and two guards step forward like shadows peeling off the wall. Let's just say that eunuch doesn't return to serve tea again. You see, Aladdin isn't just eliminating traitors, he's eliminating potential. In his mind, anyone could betray him, and if that's the case, why wait? But the bloodletting isn't the most terrifying thing. What's worse is the precision. Unlike the chaotic coups and reckless purges of other rulers, Aladdin's consolidation of power is surgical. He doesn't lash out, he slices. Think more scalpel, less hammer. He creates an intelligence network so vast and so deep, it becomes one of the earliest examples of institutionalized espionage in medieval India. Paid informants report not just on enemies, but also on friends, shopkeepers, even local poets. You can't even complain about the price of grain without it echoing back to the palace. Within 24 hours, there's a story, probably exaggerated, but delicious anyway, that Aladdin once received a full transcript of a conversation held in a village 300 miles away. Historians still argue whether this was due to trained messengers, an early pigeon relay system, or just an extremely well-paid and fast-footed network of snitches. Either way, the message was clear. He knows always. But he's not just ruling. I fear he's ruling by illusion. He begins to reshape his public image, from blood-stained usurper to benevolent visionary. You stroll past enormous murals painted across Delhi's sandstone walls. One shows him seated under a parasol shaped like the sun, holding a sword in one hand and scales in the other. Another shows him feeding orphans, though one orphan suspiciously resembles his own nephew. He definitely didn't feed anything except lies and exile. Still, it works. The people are uneasy, yes, but also dazzled. Aladdin doesn't hide his power. He performs it. Daily public appearances. New coins minted. With his face. Royal processions with elephants painted gold and dancers showering petals, and the kicker. A new palace, a magnificent complex he calls Siri Fort. You walk its dusty paths as it's being built. Dodging workers and lumbering oxen, stone by stone, it rises like a monument to paranoia. It's designed not just for splendor, but for control. Hidden corridors, guard posts at every corner. A throne room that echoes so strangely that whispers bounce like arrows, impossible to trace. It's also where he sets up the Douanars, the military affairs officer, place where soldiers are vetted, paid, and yes, monitored. He even creates a personal record of each soldier's appearance, horse breed, and pay grade. It's like a medieval HR department, but with more swords. By now, Delhi has learned, under Aladdin, there is no casual conversation. Even the pigeons look over their shoulders. And yet, you can't deny his brilliance. Aladdin quickly spots the weak points of the Sultanate leaky revenue systems, corrupt officials, and an army too lazy to chase goats, let alone Mongols. He launches sweeping reforms, beginning with land revenue. You visit a field in Punjab where farmers grumble under their breath as they're measured, taxed, and tagged like cattle. The state now takes half of every harvest. Half. But strangely it works. More revenue means more soldiers. More soldiers means more conquests. And more conquests mean more chances to die in his name. Yay, progress. Still, it's not just about the battlefield. Aladdin wants to control the streets, the markets, even the smell of the city. So next he targets the bazaars. Yes, the bazaars, because apparently the price of lentils is just as threatening as a sword. You push through a crowded spice lane where a royal inspector scolds a merchant for overpricing coriander. That's right, Aladdin launches price controls so aggressive that even black pepper gets a curfew. A separate department is created to fix prices of everything: grain, cloth, meat, shoes, horses. There are government warehouses, standard weights, and if you try to cheat, well, you disappear. The system is efficient, yes, but terrifying. Some historians believe Aladdin's market regulations were among the most sophisticated in medieval Asia. Others argue it was an economic straitjacket that only held because his grip was absolute. What's more surprising is that he bans hoarding. You catch a noble whispering plans to store wheat for winter only, to find him under arrest the next day. His granaries are emptied, and he's fined so heavily. He ends up begging at the same market stall he once owned. A fringe anecdote though. No one knows if it's true claims. Aladdin once disguised himself as a merchant and wandered through Delhi's bazaars, just to catch his officials slacking. Some say he even posed as a vegetable vendor for a day. Imagine the Sultan haggling over carrots. As time passes, you notice something odd. People stop talking freely. The city's noise dies down, but its rhythm grows faster, sharper. The economy stabilizes. Crime plummets. The army grows stronger. In the quiet, something monstrous is being built. Not just a kingdom, but a machine cold, silent, unstoppable. And yet, something about Aladdin's eyes seems tired. You see him more and more in solitude, pacing, whispering to himself. His crown fits, yes, but it's getting heavier. He's won the throne, silenced his critics, restructured an entire empire, ... But power, you realize, is addictive and deeply, deeply lonely, and you're stuck watching a man who killed his way to the top. Now trying desperately to stay there, not with love or legacy, but with lists, spies, and silence. You close your eyes for a moment, and somewhere in the distance, a bell rings. The market closes. Another report is delivered, and the shadows lean in just a little closer. The sun sets low over the rooftops of Delhi, casting long shadows that slither across the stone like silent eavesdroppers. You're back in the palace, somewhere between a dream and a scheme, and the air is thick not with incense this time, but with something colder, mistrust, curiosity, suspicion so dense you could slice it with a dagger, if it didn't slice you first. Aladdin Khilji sits on the peacock throne, and though he looks every bit the emperor, robes flowing, eyes narrowed, a polished emerald ring glinting at his knuckle, you can't help but feel like he's already looking through you, measuring your worth in secrets. This, you realize, is not a man who governs like the kings before him. He governs like a spider threading webs across the subcontinent, waiting for the smallest vibration to signal disloyalty. And right now, those webs are humming. Not with traitors, but with possibilities. Because Aladdin isn't content with Delhi. No, his hunger stretches beyond the horizon. And it begins with the one thing even emperors fear: information. You walk beside a short, sharp-eyed man named Barood, one of Aladdin's many shadow officers. You don't know his real name. No one does. Barrett isn't even a title, it's warning. These are the men who know what time you woke up, what you had for breakfast, and whether or not your cousin has a Mongol pen pal. Aladdin builds the most elaborate intelligence network the Sultanate has ever seen. Every village has a spy, every street corner has ears, and everyone has something to lose. But even this isn't enough. The Sultan wants eyes inside his court, inside his army, and most importantly, inside his nobles' minds. So he does something radical. He bans alcohol, not just for the masses, but for the elite. The logic is simple. Drunk men talk, and talking men leak empires. You step into a banquet hall once filled with laughter and sitar music, now silent except for the clink of brass water cups. Nobles fidget awkwardly. One offers a joke about grape juice, sedition, and is immediately escorted out. Later that evening, his lands are seized. That night, you lie awake in the city. Somewhere a dog barks, distant and hollow. Somewhere else, a man screams, but only once. Delhi is being reshaped, not with fire, but with cold policy. You can feel it in the bones of the city, as if its foundation has been replaced by 1,000 invisible wires, all of them leading to the throne. And Aladdin, he sleeps soundly, because every night before bed, his spies bring him a sealed scroll, reports from every district, every market, every whisper. One scroll to rule them all. Sometimes he smiles at the details: a merchant hiding coins in a clay pot, a governor bribing a tax collector with dried figs. Sometimes he smiles because he knows tomorrow those problems will disappear. Literally. But as all this unfolds, there's one issue Aladdin cannot ignore, one enemy that won't cower beneath market laws or disappear under surveillance. The Mongols. You remember them, don't you? The horsebound terror that once thundered from the steppes of Central Asia. Their arrows blotting out the sun, and their tempers wiping out cities. By the time Aladdin claims Delhi, the Mongol threat has already knocked on India's door, several times. Some knock politely. Some try to kick the door in, and Aladdin, he builds a new door altogether. He starts by fortifying Delhi itself, reinforcing its walls, digging moats, and stationing elite cavalry around the city. He doubles down on military spending. New weapons, new armor, new training routines, so brutal that even seasoned warriors groan beneath their helmets. You watch as soldiers run drills until their hands blister, then run them again. In the stables, war horses are fed on grain soaked in almond milk. In the forges, swordsmiths are told, if your blade bends, so will your spine. But again, Aladdin doesn't just prepare. He preempts. He stations spies in border provinces. Scouts ride day and night to spot Mongol movement near the northwest frontier. And then, as if daring history itself, he launches a reform that shakes even the boldest generals. He slashes military salaries. Yes, you heard that right. The logic. Soldiers shouldn't fight for gold, they should fight for loyalty. Also, because he's already controlling the markets, he adjusts food prices accordingly. A clever trick: pay less, charge less, and make sure no one has enough spare change to fund a rebellion. Of course, the nobles grumble. You sit in a smoky chamber one evening as the Rajput chiefs whisper about the old days when a loyal commander could afford 3 wives, a summer home in Multan, and enough servants to carry his dignity. Now, One salary barely covers a horse and a headache, but complaining gets you nowhere. Aladdin's ears are everywhere, and then it happens. The Mongols come, a thunder of hooves, banners like flames. You watch from the ramparts as they swarm the plains near Amro Hadedli, fast and seemingly invincible. But Aladdin is ready. He dispatches his general, Ghazi Malik, with a swift, brutal counterattack. You ride behind the vanguard as swords clash and dust swallows the sun. The Mongols are routed. But here's the twist. Aladdin doesn't just defeat them. He captures them. Then, he does something that would chill even Genghis Khan's bones. He executes every last one around, 20,000 prisoners of war. If the chroniclers are to be believed, historians still argue whether this mass execution was meant to send a message, or was simply an act of rage. Some call it necessary. Others call it monstrous. But one thing is certain. The Mongols never invade with that intensity again. You return to Delhi. Boots caked with blood and ash. The people cheer. Children toss rose petals. The Sultan appears on a gilded platform, arms raised. He says nothing. He doesn't need to. Aladdin Khilji is no longer just the man who took Delhi. He's now the man who defended it and, in doing so, solidified his grip on every heart that beats within its walls. But even now, deep inside the victory, there's a quiet whisper. What comes after power? What happens when a man who's achieved absolute control suddenly realizes there's no one left to fight? You see it in his posture. A little slower to rise from his throne. A little more time spent alone in his stone chambers. Some say he's begun talking to himself. Others say he's stopped talking entirely. You hear one rumor, whispered by a wet nurse to a noble's child, that the Sultan walks the palace at night in full armor, unable to sleep unless he hears the sound of his own boots echoing behind him. You tell yourself it's just a story. But later that night, you think you hear footsteps, slow and heavy, passing just beyond your door. The empire rests, but the spider never sleeps. You wake up to the scent of burnt cumin, fresh horse sweat, and something heavier anticipation. The city of Delhi has changed. It breathes in rhythm with the will of Aladdin Khilgi, and even the birds seem to chirp more cautiously. Markets open with military precision. Temples ring their bells 1 second too late. And in the halls of the palace, silence has become louder than speech. You move quietly through those halls, past doors that are always slightly ajar, and guards who never blink. Aladdin is now everywhere and nowhere at once. He doesn't just rule, he haunts. You'd think, after routing the Mongols and taming the capital, that he would relax, recline, maybe enjoy a grape or two. But no. Conquest has only sharpened his appetite. And while his enemies feared his army, his allies are beginning to fear something worse: his attention. Because Aladdin isn't satisfied with just borders and budgets anymore. He's interested in your thoughts, your loyalties, your very intentions. And if he even suspects your intentions bend in a direction he doesn't approve of, you might as well start writing your own eulogy. One afternoon you find yourself in the audience chamber, standing among rows of courtiers who shuffle their feet nervously while trying not to sweat under their layered brocade. A noble is summoned to the front, a man named Anil Mulk, known for his poetry and his too pretty eyes. The Sultan leans forward, resting his chin on his palm. "You spoke of me in verse," he says, slowly, as if unwrapping a trap. "I am honored." "Do recite it," the man stutters. He hadn't expected the Sultan to know. How could he? He read that poem alone to a friend in a garden 2 weeks ago. And yet, here it is, being weaponized in a throne room. He begins to recite, voice trembling. The poem is harmless enough, a metaphor, an illusion. But one line uses the word iron-fisted. Aladdin smiles. "A compliment, surely," he says, eyes cold. The poet is dismissed. But he never makes it home. No one asks. Why? That's just how it goes now. You'd think the court would grow quieter, duller, but in a twisted way, it grows more fascinating. Because now, loyalty is currency. Whoever praises the Sultan best, in the most flattering, least suspicious way, climbs the ladder. And whoever hesitates, even slightly, slides right off into obscurity or worse. You begin to notice certain faces appearing more often. One of them is a slave. Not a servant, not a noble, but a former slave named Malik Kafur. He's striking, with sharp features and the kind of stillness that rumors ripple like silk through the court, that Aladdin favors him more than generals, more than ministers, more than blood. Some even whisper of a romance, though of course no one dares say such things near the walls. Historians still argue about the true nature of their relationship. Was Malik Kafur just a brilliant military mind, or something more? Some say he was the Sultan's shadow, others say his heart. You can't tell. But you do know one thing: Aladdin begins trusting no one except him, and with that trust comes responsibility. Malik Kafur begins receiving military assignments, minor at first, then grander, then shocking. And every time he delivers, victories pile up like cushions in the harem. The nobles grow restless. Who is this boy? Why is he whispering into the Sultan's ear? And why do their own titles and lands seem to shrink every time he rises? The jealousy is ripe, and the palace begins to crack at the seams with scheming. One night, as you pass by a side corridor, you see three nobles huddled together, arguing in hushed tones. One draws a dagger, buries it in a pillar for emphasis. They're plotting. You don't hear the details, but the tone is unmistakable. And sure enough, 3 days later, one of them is discovered accidentally drowned in a royal fountain. The other two are promoted. You wonder, did they betray their own co-conspirator to gain favor? Or did Aladdin simply decide who was more useful? You'll never know. But the air around the court is charged now, like the sky before a storm. Because here's what's really happening. Aladdin is building a regime, where everyone is being watched and watching each other. Every glance is a test. Every silence, a statement. You once saw a man executed for laughing too loudly at a joke that was too irreverent for court. What was the joke? No one remembers. No one dares repeat it. Meanwhile, Malik Kafur continues to rise. He begins accompanying Aladdin to private meetings, overseeing troop formations, and even making public speeches in the Sultan's name. And it's not just his ambition, it's his ruthlessness. On one southern campaign, he reportedly had over 300 enemy soldiers buried alive, simply because they refused to convert or bow. That's not just war, it's a statement. You ride out with them once, through the Deccan plains. The air is thick with monsoon heat. Villages crumble before their path like dry bread. Temples are looted, and the treasure caravans stretch for miles. But there's an eerie calm to Malik Kafur. He doesn't revel in violence. He administers it, like a clerk stamping papers, efficient, cold, unshakable. Aladdin watches all of this, not with horror, but with approval, because here, finally, is a man who understands the vision. Not just power, not just fear, but control so complete, so absolute, that it crushes even the possibility of rebellion. You see them once, in the moonlit courtyard, the Sultan and his general, no guards, no words, just standing there in the blue silence, as if connected by something invisible. The empire sleeps. But you can't. Not anymore. Because the more you watch Aladdin, the more you realize he's not chasing legacy. He's not chasing conquest. He's chasing something far more terrifying. Perfection. A world where nothing surprises him. Where every move is calculated, every threat preempted, every person a piece on his chessboard. And the only person who truly understands the game is the piece he trusts most. Malik Kafur. You turn away from the courtyard, heart thudding. Somewhere in the distance, a night bird calls. And you can't help but wonder how long before the Sultan starts seeing everyone else as unnecessary. You're on the road now, not by choice, but by royal command. Traveling with Aladdin's armies as they thunder southward through the cracked and sun-baked heart of the Indian subcontinent. The year is 1296, barely behind you, but history is already galloping forward, and you're clinging to the saddle as Aladdin Khilji launches his most daring campaign yet, a raid on Divijiri, the capital of the Yadava kingdom, rich with gold, defiance, and a dangerously underestimated sense of self. The sun blisters overhead, and the terrain shifts from dry stone to lush forest and back again. But the army marches like a river, unrelenting, fast, and far too large to ignore. You watch from the rearguard as scouts report that Ramachandra, the king of Devagiri, has no idea this is coming. And why would he? No Sultan of Delhi had ever dared strike so deep into the Deccan before. This isn't expansion. This is invasion with a twist of vengeance. And the roads are paved with exhausted horses, stolen provisions, and fear disguised as confidence. The soldiers grumble about the heat, but Aladdin rides at the front, eyes scanning every hilltop like they're whispering secrets about him. His plan is astonishingly simple. Strike before anyone expects it, loot everything that shines, and leave before the southern kingdoms can respond. And here's the twist. It works. You reach the outskirts of Devagiri in a blur of motion. The city is caught off guard, its garrisons weak, its treasury bloated with silver gems, and the kind of wealth that tempts even the most principled of men. You pass temples laden with golden arches, vaults filled with coin, and statues encrusted with more jewels than a queen's dowry. Aladdin doesn't hesitate. His troops break through the city's defenses with shocking ease, and the loot begins to flow like honey from a ruptured hive. Gold bricks, silk rolls, ivory tusks, it's all there, and it's all claimed in the name of the Sultanate. But the real treasure isn't the gold. It's the message. You can feel it in the air as you walk through the pillaged palace. Aladdin is telling India's southern kings, your distance will not protect you. Devagiri isn't just a victory. It's a warning shot, echoing across 1,000 miles of jungle, hills, and dynastic pride. And while the soldiers drink from golden cups and tie emeralds to their swords, the Sultan remains curiously reserved. He hasn't done this for luxury. He's done it for leverage. And you realize this isn't the last time he'll come this far. In fact, it's just the beginning. You return to Delhi weighed down with spoils. Caravans stretch for miles. The city greets you with incense and fanfare. But Aladdin barely raises an eyebrow. He's already calculating the next move. You see, this isn't about conquest for its own sake. It's about economics. The loot from Devagiri floods the treasury. Prices drop, taxes are adjusted, and suddenly, the empire feels richer, more stable, more ... complete. For the first time in decades, Delhi isn't just surviving, it's thriving. But you should know by now that nothing thrives under Aladdin without consequence. With newfound wealth comes a new problem: envy. Other kings begin watching him with wary eyes, and some within his own court begin to grumble. The nobles are especially irritated. They whisper that Aladdin is becoming too powerful, too ambitious, too willing to break tradition. He's a butcher's grandson, one of them hisses over roasted lamb. He forgets his place. But Aladdin hasn't forgotten anything, least of all betrayal. He starts reshuffling his court again. Familiar faces disappear. New faces, anonymous, terrifyingly efficient, take their place. And every policy becomes sharper, every speech shorter, every decree more final. Around this time, you hear of a chilling idea. The Sultan wants to abolish hereditary privileges. Let that sink in. In a world ruled by lineage and bloodline, Aladdin wants power to depend on merit, not ancestry. The nobles nearly choke on their peacock stew. But Aladdin doesn't care. Why should a man be powerful, he asks one day, during a court session. Just because his grandfather was. You can hear the collective gasp, even as no one dares respond. The air in the court thickens. And then, as if to underline his philosophy, Aladdin sends Malik Kafurius, the same slave-turned-general, on a new expedition. This time, the target is Gujarat, rich, vibrant, commercially vital, and completely unprepared. You travel west. Now, your body aching from endless marches, but your eyes sharp, because you know something unprecedented is happening. Kafur leads the charge like a man possessed. His tactics are terrifying in their precision. Cities fall like dominoes, and the pillaging is methodical. Temples are not spared. One particularly controversial act shocks even the seasoned warriors: the desecration of the Somnath Templius. That Somnath, already once plundered centuries earlier. And now, again, its treasures are taken, its priests silenced, its sanctity violated. You walk past its shattered spires, and wonder if there's anything sacred enough to be safe under this new regime. But here's the twist: Kafur doesn't just loot. He brings back prisoners, skilled artisans, courtesans, even elephants. The empire's capital begins to resemble a mosaic of its conquered lands, and Aladdin, he barely blinks. Some say he even smiles when the first elephant from Gujarat bows in his court. Others say he remains silent, turning the beast away with a wave. The records disagree, but what's undeniable is this: Aladdin is reshaping India not just through conquest, but through redistribution. Wealth, power, talent, they all flow toward Delhi now. You feel it in the city streets. Goldsmiths have more orders than they can fill. Poets are composing new odes about a sultan who wields the sword like a quill. And ordinary people, they're terrified, but oddly optimistic. There's food, there's trade, there's order. If you don't question too much, life under Aladdin starts to feel almost ... livable. But that's the catch. You must not question, ever. Because, as prosperity grows, so does control. The market inspectors become stricter. The price regulations more severe, and spies everywhere. One merchant is hanged for hoarding ghee. Another is flogged for cheating a widow on lentil prices. Justice is swift, public, and without appeal. You attend one such execution in the central square. The man screams innocence until the rope tightens. The crowd murmurs, then claps. You don't know whether to cry or applaud, because here's the genius of Aladdin. He makes brutality look like fairness. He doesn't kill out of rage. He punishes out of principle. Every execution is a sermon. Every tax a lesson. Every raid a chapter in a play, where he is author, director, and star, and the empire. It obeys. You lie in bed one night, the sounds of Delhi humming around you, temple bells, muffled drums, the soft tread of leather boots that never stop, and you wonder, is this peace, or just the silence between storms? You wake before the city does, as the earliest light brushes the sandstone walls of Delhi in a color that might have once been called hopeful. But you know better now. You've been here too long, seen too much. The city doesn't rise with joy yet, rises with calculation. Every gate that creaks open, every torch extinguished by a morning breeze, every cough in the alleys behind the palace, it all feels rehearsed, as if Delhi has become a stage, and everyone is acting out their roles for an audience they can't see. That unseen audience, of course, is Aladdin Khilji. Though you've walked his marble halls and stood near enough to smell the myrrh oil on his robes, he remains elusive, more myth than monarch now. He barely speaks in public anymore. His gaze does all the talking, and what it says depends on how close you are to power. Closer means danger, but farther means irrelevance. And no one wants to be irrelevant in a world where attention equals survival. Today is different though. There's movement, rumor, a chill in the wind that has nothing to do with weather. The Deccan calls again, and this time, not for looting. It calls for conquest, for permanence. You hear it first in the barracks, a new order scribbled on parchment, sealed with the Sultan's personal stamp. Malik Kafur is to march south again. But this time, it's not just Devagiri or Gujarat. It's the great dynasties of the southern peninsula, the Kakatiyas, the Hoysalas, the Pandus, mighty kingdoms rooted in deep tradition, heavy with temple gold, and far too confident in their own geography to believe the north would ever reach them. Aladdin wants them broken, and not in theory. In fact, he wants their crowns melted, their resistance studied, their wealth carried to Delhi in long winding caravans like ceremonial processions of submission. And so it begins. You are with the army once again, passing through landscapes so dramatically different from the north that it feels like a new planet, dense forests draped in vines, rivers thick with crocodiles, villages that speak in tongues your ears have never heard. The Deccan is ancient, proud, and ready to die before it kneels. But Malik Kafur isn't here to negotiate. He's here to dismantle. The campaign is nothing short of brutal. First comes Warangal, the Kakatiya capital. Its magnificent high walls, intricate stone temples, and a garrison that believes no army could breach its defenses. But Kafur doesn't need brute force, he needs time. He lays siege with such cold precision that the cockatias begin to unravel, not from battle, but from hunger. And when they finally open the gates, it's not peace they receive, it's dismemberment. The treasury is emptied, the royal family humiliated, and the famed Kohinoor Diamondius. That Kohinoor becomes one of the glittering prizes, transported back to Delhi. You see it, resting on a velvet cushion, dulled not by scratches, but by history's weight. A gem too beautiful to trust. From there, the army turns to Dwara Sumudra, the Hoysala stronghold. Resistance is stiffer here. The temples are fortified, the warriors disciplined, and the King Vera Balali is no coward. But even courage folds under exhaustion. The Hoysala armies are whittled down, their elephants slaughtered, their pride decimated. Again, the city falls. Again, the loot is staggering. And again, Delhi waits with its greedy hands open. You begin to wonder if there's any part of the subcontinent Aladdin won't try to fold into his empire. But he's not done. The final act is reserved for the Pondius and Madariya city soaked in ancient culture, where temples rise like mountains and the scent of jasmine mixes with blood in the air. This time, resistance turns frenzied. The Pandya princes split, fighting, not just against the invaders, but each other. And Malik Kafur exploits the chaos with the elegance of a poet unsheathing a blade. Madurai falls. Not gracefully, not tragically, but completely. What follows is perhaps the most gruesome part of the campaign. Temples are desecrated, idols smashed, priests silenced, and treasures stripped until the sanctums echo with nothing but shame. And you walk those temple floors, feeling the stones still warm from the previous night's fire rituals, now scattered with ash and sandalwood and silence. And you realize that conquest isn't just about victory, it's about rewriting what people believe is possible. But here's the quiet irony. Malik Kafur is winning, yes, but the empire he's fighting for is changing underneath him. You return to Delhi again, a little less human each time. The city greets you not with applause, but with calculation. Everyone wants to know what Kafur brought back, what he whispered to the Sultan. What new jewel now glimmers on Aladdin's turban? And speaking of Aladdin, he's fading, not in power, but in presence. He appears rarely now, often veiled, sometimes carried. Whispers ripple through the court, like poison through wine. He is sick. Not with a cold, not with a wound, but with something more insidious. Something that makes his hands tremble, and his mind darker. You see it in his eyes. Those once razor-sharp blades are now pools of shadow. He trusts no one, not even Malik Kafur, not even himself. And yet, his paranoia doesn't paralyze him. It accelerates him. He doubles down on control. New edicts, stricter surveillance, secret executions. His court shrinks. His words shorten. His dreams, however, grow monstrous. He begins discussing a divine kingship, a concept that would place him not just above nobles and generals, but above the very laws of Islam. Historians still argue whether he meant it politically or literally. Did he truly believe himself God appointed, or was it just the fever talking? Either way, it was unprecedented. A Muslim ruler in India, hinting at divine right in a land already tense with faith. The ulama, the religious scholars, are horrified. They petition, they protest, and Aladdin, he ignores them completely. He claims he rules not by Sharia, but by his own law. The Zawabit, he calls them. His own commandments. And just like that, religious authority cracks under imperial weight. You remember the day clearly. A Friday sermon at the central mosque. The Qadi hesitates before mentioning the Sultan's name in the traditional prayer. Someone coughs loudly. Someone else leaves. You glance around, and you know nothing sacred is safe anymore. And yet Delhi doesn't erupt. It adapts. Because under Aladdin, adaptation isn't just survival, it's the only option. His health declines further. He becomes bedridden, issuing orders from behind embroidered curtains. Malik Kafur becomes his mouthpiece, his sword, his face to the world. And some begin to ask the unthinkable question. When Aladdin dies, who will rule? You look at Kafur and wonder if he's already begun imagining the crown on his own head. After all, he's won wars, governed provinces, silenced dissent. And though born a slave, he now commands like a king, Delhi knows. The walls know. Even the parrots in the market stalls seem to mimic his name. But Aladdin still breathes. And as long as he breathes, the empire remains intact. You step out into the city one dusk, the sky streaked with the red of too many endings. The banners flutter, the chants echo. And in the palace, behind velvet and silk, a man lies in pain, dreaming of an empire that obeyed not just his sword, but his silence. The palace has grown quieter now, unnaturally so. Like a theater, after the final act when the curtains refuse to close and the audience dares not move. You feel it as you step through the gates in unease that hums beneath the polished stone. The golden-laid archways, the corridors that once rang with the confident footfalls of ministers, poets, generals. Now, even the birds on the palace roofs hesitate to sing. Aladdin Khilji, the spider, in the center of the web, lies hidden behind layers of velvet and distrust, his body rotting faster than his empire dares to admit. He is still Sultan, yes, but only by title. In reality, he is now more myth than monarch, more rumor than ruler. And into this vacuum, like a tide swelling in the moonlight, steps the man who was once a slave Malik Kafur. You've watched him rise from the edge of the court to its core, collecting power the way others collect titles. Where once he stood behind Aladdin's throne like a shadow, he now begins to speak in the Sultan's name, sign documents with the Sultan's seal, and issue commands as if he wears the crown. The court adjusts. It always does. Nobles bow a little lower when Kafur enters. The guards stand a little straighter. The scribes copy his tone, his phrasing, his silences. But make no mistake, behind every nod is fear. Because everyone knows Kafur did not climb through flattery or patience. He climbed through blood. And if he has his way, the next chapter of the Khilji dynasty may have no Khilji at all. You see it first in the way he controls access to the Sultan. Not even princes can approach Aladdin without his permission. Ministers, once summoned daily, now wait days for an audience and return pale and silent. Rumors flood the palace, that Aladdin is no longer conscious, that he speaks only in whispers, that he's blind, mad, or already dead. No one can say for sure, because Kafur says nothing, and the silence speaks volumes. The first real shock comes when Aladdin's eldest son, Kaiser Khan, is placed under house arrest. You remember the moment vividly. The prince, proud and adored by the people, dragged from his quarters in the dead of night, his cries muffled by velvet ropes. The official charge: disloyalty. The real reason: he was too popular, too legitimate, and far too alive for Kafur's comfort. The city is stunned. Merchants whisper behind shuttered stalls. Imams lower their voices during prayer. And you begin to understand that the man who fought for Aladdin is now fighting for his own crown. But here's the tragedy: no crown will ever truly fit him. Because while Kafur commands the army, governs the empire, and walks like a ruler, he is still, in the eyes of the court, an outsider, a eunuch, a slave. And nothing terrifies the nobles more than the idea that someone like him might permanently seize power. Historians still debate his intentions. Some argue he planned to declare himself Sultan the moment Aladdin died. Others believe he was loyal to the end, merely executing the Sultan's will with ruthless efficiency. The truth, as always, lies somewhere in the shadows. And the shadows are where Kafur thrives. When Aladdin finally dies quietly, without ceremony, sometime in early January of 1316, the palace doesn't erupt. It contracts, like a wounded animal, unsure whether to attack or flee. The news is not announced publicly for days. Kafur controls the narrative, locks down the city, and surrounds himself with the only people he trusts: soldiers. The nobles are stunned, paralyzed by uncertainty. Who rules now? Who decides what happens next? Kafur moves swiftly. He has one of Aladdin's younger sons, Shihabuddin, declared the new sultan. The boy is barely 5. The implications are clear: Kafur will rule as regent, or perhaps more honestly, as master. And for a few tense, surreal weeks, that's exactly what he does. He sits on the throne, holds court, issues royal decrees. For the first time in the history of the Delhi Sultanate, a former slave rules India. In everything but name. The empire is his. But empires, like wild beasts, never bow for long. The backlash begins almost immediately. Disenfranchised nobles plot quietly. Loyalists to Khizr Khan seethe. Even the common people begin to murmur, their fear no longer enough to silence their outrage. Kafur responds the only way he knows how, with executions. He has Khizr Khan killed in secret, the body dumped in an unmarked grave. His younger brothers vanish. Others are imprisoned, exiled, or simply made to disappear. You attend one of the new regent's public audiences, and you can feel the tension in the air. The courtiers smile too wide, clap too long, sweat too freely. They know this can't last. And they're right, because Kafur, for all his brilliance, has made one critical mistake. He has ruled through fear, not through alliances. And fear, once cracked, spreads faster than loyalty ever could. Just 6 weeks after Aladdin's death, the conspiracy against Kafur boils over. A group of palace guardsmen who once saluted him drag him from his chambers in the dead of night. Some say he fought. Others say he wept. Either way, he is butchered before sunrise. No ceremony. No gravy. Just silence. The regency collapses in a heartbeat. And suddenly, the empire is no longer guided by one will, but torn between many. You wander the palace the next morning, dazed. The throne room is empty. The corridors echo with a strange, unfamiliar freedom. But it doesn't feel like liberation. It feels like confusion. Like a spell has broken. But no one knows what to do next. The Khilji dynasty staggers on, but it's wounded, hollow. Aladdin's sons squabble. Governors rebel. The economy sputters. And you realize that the empire you've known, the one built on surveillance, conquest, and control, died not with Aladdin, but with the man who tried to inherit it by force. The palace tapestries still shimmer. The army still drills. The markets still open, but something has changed. Not on the surface, but beneath it. A fracture. A sense that the age of iron-fisted certainty is over. And a new era, messier, bloodier, more uncertainties, about to begin. You sit by a fountain in the palace courtyard, watching as a child plays with a wooden sword, oblivious to the ghosts that linger in the marble around him. You think of Aladdin, of Malik Kafur, of Khizr Khan, and of the countless others whose names will never make it into official histories. And you wonder, when power passes from one hand to another, is it ever really transferred or merely borrowed, like a costume in a play that never ends? You wake up to a city that looks the same, but feels fundamentally different. Like a puppet whose strings have been cut mid-performance, leaving its limbs limp and unsure of their next move. Delhi breathes, yes, but not confidently. It inhales, with hesitation, and exhales, with confusion. The shadow of Aladdin Khilji still lingers over every courtyard, every market stall, every military parade. Yet no one dares say his name too loudly anymore, not out of fear, but because doing so might remind them of just how much they've lost, and how little they now understand of the world they live in. The Khilji dynasty, once a roaring juggernaut of ambition and steel, now sputters forward on weak legs and weaker leadership. Aladdin's sons, thrust into a game their father spent a lifetime mastering, flail and fumble like actors cast in a tragedy they neither rehearsed nor wrote. You watch with something between pity and dread as Shihabuddin, the child Sultan Malik Kafur tried to place on the throne, is removed from it almost as quickly as he was elevated. The boy never had a chance, used, then discarded. In his place comes Qutbuddin Mubarak Shah, Aladdin's surviving adult son. A man with just enough presence to seize the moment, but not nearly enough strength to define it. He walks into the throne room not like a conqueror, but like a man entering a stranger's house, cautious eyes darting to the corners, waiting for the past to leap out and reclaim what he has inherited. And in a way, the past does exactly that. Because while the throne might be his, the expectations aren't. People look at him and see not a king, but the ghost of a king. They compare his every word to Aladdin's silence, his every gesture to Kafur's command, and his every failure to an ideal no mortal could possibly sustain. Mubarak tries, though. He reverses some of his father's harsher policies. He lifts the bans on alcohol, releases prisoners, reinstates the privileges of nobles, and, most tellingly, attempts to be liked. But in a kingdom forged by discipline and fear, kindness reads as weakness. The military senses it first, then the bureaucrats, then the enemies beyond the border. You notice it, and the market's prices rise again, corruption returns, the merchants speak a little more freely, and spies look less motivated. The web Aladdin wove so tightly is unraveling thread by thread, and no one has the fingers to knot it back together. Meanwhile, Mubarak indulges, not in war or politics, but in pleasure. His court becomes known less for strategy and more for scandal. Poets, dancers, musicians, wine everything Aladdin. Suppressed flourishes again, not in moderation, but in excess. And among this new circle of influence emerges a figure that pulls the entire story toward its next act. Khusro Khan. He is handsome, charming, quick-witted, and dangerous in a way that doesn't register until it's too late. Like Kafur, he too was once a slave, captured in war, converted to Islam, and raised within the confines of the palace. Khusro Khan begins as an entertainer, then becomes a favorite, then something much more intimate. The Sultan, drawn to him like a moth to an oil lamp, elevates him rapidly. Titles are granted. Power is handed over. And slowly, Khusro becomes a center of gravity in the court. The whispers return. Historians still argue about the nature of their relationship. Was it romantic, political, opportunistic? Perhaps all of the above. What's clear is that the palace is once again ruled by a bond more personal than official, and this time, there is no army general or fearsome visionary to balance it. Mubarak, in love with his own illusion of control, begins ignoring warnings. He promotes Khusro's family, appoints his allies to high positions, and worst of all, he underestimates the resentment brewing beneath the surface. Because while Aladdin's reign was defined by subjugation, Mubarak's is defined by betrayal. One by one, those around him begin shifting their loyalties, hedging their bets. And Khusro, ever the performer, smiles sweetly while rehearsing something deadly behind closed doors. The moment of reckoning arrives, not with a war cry, but with silence. One night, while the city sleeps, Khusro's supporters stage a swift and bloodless coup inside the palace. The guards are bribed or sympathetic. The ministers are unaware or indifferent. Mubarak is captured, imprisoned, and within hours, executed. No grand trial, no last speech. Just a whispered rumor and a still body. You find out the next morning when the palace doors open to a different flag, a different face, and a different tone entirely. Khusro Khan declares himself Sultan. The nobles are stunned, the people confused, and the military divided. A Hindu-born convert to Islam, a former slave, now claims the throne of Delhi. It's unprecedented. It's blasphemous to some, inspirational to others, and to most it's terrifying. Because, if the rules can bend this far, what rules remain? Khusro tries to hold the center. He issues edicts of inclusion, promising peace between faiths, equality between castes, and prosperity for all. But beneath his progressive veneer lies the rot of uncertainty. His grip on power is tenuous at best. The army does not respect him. The bureaucracy does not trust him. And the people tired of power games don't believe him. Within weeks, rebellions stir. The old guard begins to reassemble. Among them is a name whispered more and more with every passing day. Ghazi Malik. You remember him, a seasoned general. Loyal once to Aladdin, then cast aside during the chaos. He's quiet, calculating, and most importantly, not yet broken. Ghazi Malik watches from the shadows as Khusro fumbles the throne. He waits, gathering support, meeting with discontented nobles, forging alliances in quiet corners and secret chambers. Then, like a blade unsheathed in the dark, he strikes. His army marches into Delhi with frightening ease. The guards desert. The people do not resist, and Khusro. He is captured while trying to flee through a tunnel beneath the palace ghat, humiliated, and executed with the brutal efficiency of someone who knows exactly how fragile crowns can be. Ghazi Malik ascends the throne. But he does not take the Khilji name. No, He declares a new dynasty, the Tughluks, and with it, a new beginning. The Khiljis are finished. Their empire, born from blood and brilliance, ends not with a bang, but with a whisper. You sit alone that evening, on the same palace terrace, where you once watched Alauddin Khilji survey his empire. The view hasn't changed. The sprawl of Delhi, the domes and spires, the Yamuna River snaking like a silver thread through the dust, but the feeling is different. It's quieter now, not peaceful, just ... Tired, you think of the ambitions that built this world, of the genius that enforced it, of the loyalty that perished under its weight, and you realize empires don't fall when they're defeated. They fall when no one remembers why they were built. The Khilji dynasty gave India one of its most formidable rulers, reshaped the political and economic landscape, and flirted with both divine absolutism and absolute chaos. But in the end, all it took to erase it was a moment of blindness, a flicker of misplaced trust, and the same ambition that had once made it great. Now, it's just a name in the chronicles, a shadow on the map, and the torch has passed, for better or worse, into hands that do not remember the warmth of the fire that came before. You remain seated on that same terrace as the night deepens around you, and though the torches flicker dutifully along the parapets of the old Khilji palace, they no longer inspire awe. They simply burn like remnants of a story that is told itself too many times. Delhi breathes differently now under the banner of the Tughlaq dynasty. Ghazi Malik, now ruling as Sultan Ghiyasuddin Tughlaq, takes the reins with a cold clarity that only comes from having watched others fail. He's no dreamer like Alauddin, no puppet like Mubarak Shah, and certainly no opportunist like Khusro Khan. He is a soldier king with scars in place of stars, and for all his ambition, he understands the brutal arithmetic of power, loyalty, plus discipline equals survival. You watch as he begins his rule with a tone so stark, so sober, it feels almost medicinal. His first acts are not of celebration, but consolidation. He appoints men he trusts, fortifies the army, and reclaims the administrative structures that had collapsed in the final gasps of the Khilgi reign. There are no grand feasts, no parades. Instead, there are inspections, audits, orders. You almost admire him for this quiet refusal to indulge in grandeur, while setting the shattered machinery of the Sultanate back into motion. Yet you can't help but feel a strange emptiness. In the city, the people move with purpose, but not passion. The artists compose but do not sing. It's as if the very soul of Delhi has been buried alongside the Khiljis, and all that remains is function. You remember how Alauddin's Delhi pulsed with contradiction, brutality laced with beauty, tyranny sown with triumph, cruelty balanced by vision. Ghiyasuddin's Delhi, in contrast, is neat, uninspired, safe. For a while, it works. Builds infrastructure. Roads are repaired. Trade routes reopened. He commissions a massive fortress south of Delhi, a planned city called Telakabad, carved from stone and ambition. You visit it once, as it rises from the red dust, watching laborers hammer slabs of granite under the sun, the rhythm of their toil echoing off half-finished ramparts. It's impressive, yes, but somehow cold. The architecture speaks of endurance, not elegance. And you can't help but wonder if the Sultan is building a monument to security or to fear. There's an old legend that spreads through the bazaar, told in hushed tones, that Ghiyasuddin forced a Sufi saint, Nizamuddin, to stop construction on his own charitable reservoir because it competed with Telakabad. Supposedly, the saint cursed the city with the words, Ya Ra-Hey, Ujiar, Ya Ba-Se, Gugar, which loosely means, may it remain deserted, or be inhabited by Kuher. You smirk at the tale, but you also note that the city, grand as it appears, never truly fills. It stands like a ghost town dressed for a royal wedding that was cancelled mid-ceremony. Meanwhile, Ghiyasuddin's greatest challenge comes not from enemies or infrastructure, but from within his own family, his son, Muhammad bin Tughlaq. Now there's a name you'll want to remember, for all the wrong reasons. If Alauddin Khilji was a master of control, and Ghiyasuddin, a master of caution, then Muhammad bin Tughlaq will prove to be a master of madness disguised as genius. You first meet him in court, draped in silks, far too fine for someone so young. Eyes blazing with ideas, far too strange for someone so close to power. He speaks in riddles. He quotes philosophers in 3 languages. He proposes moving the capital to Daulatabad, in the Deccan over 1,000 kilometers away, to better administer the south, he says. But what he really wants is obedience. And he demands it in a way that even Aladdin might have found extreme. Ghiyasuddin, pragmatic and cautious, senses the volatility in his son. He keeps him at a distance that, it turns out, is a fatal mistake. In 1325, Ghiyasuddin returns to Delhi from a successful campaign in Bengal. A grand welcome is organized: elephants, fireworks, poetry. A wooden pavilion is erected near the outskirts of the city. You're there, watching the crowd swell with cheers and laughter. Ghiyasuddin enters, smiling, proud, unknowing. Then, suddenly, the pavilion collapses. Chaos, screams dust. And when it clears, the Sultan lies crushed beneath the wreckage. An accident, they say. But no one believes it, least of all you. Muhammad bin Tughlaq ascends the throne within hours. As a monk, his father's body still warm. And in that moment, the legacy of the Khilji dynasty, its obsessions with power, ambition, and the dangerous brilliance of lone men leaps, like a ghost, into this new era. Because whatever you thought Aladdin was visionary, tyrant, genius, you're about to see all of it multiplied tenfold in Muhammad bin Tughlaq, without the breaks. The new sultan begins his reign with promises of reform, equality, knowledge. He's educated, fluent in Greek philosophy, Persian poetry, Hindu cosmology. He dreams of unifying the subcontinent, of bringing order through intellect. But intellect without empathy is a dangerous fuel. And Muhammad burns through it like wildfire. He revives many of Aladdin's reforms, but strips them of their nuance. He fixes prices, but too rigidly. He mints a new currency, token coins, made of brass and copper, and expects the economy to obey his imagination. It doesn't. Counterfeit floods the markets. Inflation explodes. The merchants rebel in silence. You hold one of those coins in your palm, one slight, oddly warm, stamped with the Sultan's seal. It feels more like a lie than a currency. You try to use it at a roadside stall, and the old woman selling figs just laughs, muttering that the coin's value is now worth less than the wood it could be burned for. But the worst blunder, by far, is the forced migration of Delhi's population to Daulatabad. Yes, the capital is moved. Physically, families uprooted, homes abandoned, entire neighborhoods dragged south by royal decree. You watch the caravans stretch for miles, oxen groaning under carts piled with prayer rugs, spices, children. Many die along the way. Others simply vanish into the forests. When you reach Daulatabad, it's a beautiful fortress, but the city around it is a ghost town. The water is scarce, the climate foreign, and the people homesick. Within 2 years, Muhammad admits defeat and orders everyone to return. The same journey again, only this time, the road back is paved with bitterness. Back in Delhi, the old city limps along. The Khilji palaces are in disrepair. The mosques are cracked. The markets have learned to barter again, like nothing had ever changed. You sit in the courtyard of the old Khilgi mosque one evening, watching the call to prayer echo off the fading dome. The stone remembers, even if the people try not to. And you realize, empires don't fall all at once. They unravel, stitch by stitch, echo by echo, mistake by mistake. The Khiljis may be gone, their name buried beneath layers of new dynasties. New decrees, new madness, but their ghost remains. It lingers in every paranoid monarch, every overreaching reformer, every idealist too clever to rule with restraint. And as the stars blink into the night sky above Delhi once more, you know that you've lived through something more than history. You've lived through a cycle, a loop of ambition, brilliance, cruelty, collapse, and it's starting all over again. You wander Delhi now, with the quiet detachment of someone who has seen too much and trusts too little. The streets are full again, but the sound has changed. Where once there was the metallic clang of Aladdin's law, and the thunderous hoofbeats of conquest. Now there is only the nervous shuffle of a city, unsure of its own skin. People smile quickly and glance sideways. The bazaars buzz, but with caution. Even the mosques feel subdued, as if the call to prayer has learned to whisper. Muhammad ben Tughlaq reigns with intellect, like a sword, a weapon too sharp, too untested, and too eager to prove itself. You've watched him pace the marble halls barefoot, speaking to philosophers no one else can see. You've seen the madness bloom in real time, in the way he obsessively rewrites tax codes, flips cities like dice, and carries books like talismans he's afraid to open. Where Aladdin's rule was rooted in an iron-fisted realism, Muhammad's rule feels like a fever, dream brilliant in theory, catastrophic in practice. And the people? They're exhausted. This emperor of paradoxes, who reads Plato but executes with a smile, who fasts like a saint but taxes like a demon, has pulled the empire so tight it's beginning to crack. Remember, the Khiljis, the tight control, the forced regulations, the economic chessboard. Muhammad takes all of that and builds a palace of glass atop it, beautiful, but already splintering. His decision to move the capital to Dawlatabad was only the first tremor. The next comes in the form of agriculture. You walk through the fields of the Doab, the lush, fertile land between the Ganga and Yamuna. Rivers and see villagers staring at parchments they cannot read, explaining new tax laws they cannot understand. Muhammad has increased the land revenue beyond reason, assuming that prosperity means capacity. But monsoons are unpredictable. Crops fail, and suddenly, farmers are expected to pay grain they don't have. Those who refuse are punished. You pass bodies hanging from people, trees, eyes open to the crows. The villagers don't even cry anymore. They just dig shallow graves and return to their oxen. The countryside begins to wither, not from drought, but from overreach. Muhammad, when told of the chaos, does not back down. He doubles down his reasoning. A system that punishes disorder will eventually produce order. Historians still argue whether he believed this, or whether he simply couldn't bear to be wrong. And then comes the foreign policy. If Aladdin's campaigns were defined by clear motives, territory, wealth, deterrence, Muhammad's are driven by abstraction. He declares war on regions his army hasn't even scouted. He sends emissaries to China and receives nothing in return. He plans invasions with maps that aren't even accurate. You march with one of these expeditions into the Himalayas. The soldiers are underfed, poorly clothed, and told to wait in the snow for weeks while Muhammad recalculates. Many die of frostbite. The survivors curse not their enemies, but their own command. By now, rebellion is no longer a rumor. It's a schedule. Provinces begin to rise first, Bengal, then Gujarat, then the Deccan again. Each one led by a former general, a dismissed noble, a desperate tax collector turned warlord. Muhammad responds, not with negotiation, but with wrath. He sends armies he cannot sustain, led by men he does not trust, into battles they do not believe in, and the empire begins to bleed from every direction. But perhaps the strangest chapter of all is what you witness next. In a fit of idealism, or perhaps divine inspiration, Muhammad attempts to create a perfect administrative class. He calls it the Diwan-e-Kohi, an agricultural department that is supposed to manage farming scientifically. He imports grain, redistributes land, hires thousands of officials. On paper, it's revolutionary. In practice, it's lunacy. The officials are corrupt. The grain disappears. The farmers, caught between taxes and bureaucracy, revolt. You walk through one of these model farms one evening, stepping over cracked irrigation channels and broken plows. The fields are empty. The sky is full of vultures. A lone farmer, toothless and skeletal, tells you he tried to grow discipline like wheat, but forgot wheat needs rain. The poetic pain of that line stays with you for days. Even the city, once the jewel of the empire, becomes a theater of dysfunction. The token currency introduced by Muhammad collapses entirely. No one trusts it. The markets revert to barter. You trade your shoes for a handful of rice once, and consider yourself lucky. Inflation is so chaotic that beggars begin accepting only gold or silver. You see a man try to pay for bread with 20 copper coins, only to be laughed out of the stall. The coins scatter on the road, trampled by donkeys. And amidst all this, Muhammad still writes. He pens letters to governors, urging patience. He drafts philosophical treatises. He hosts debates with scholars who dare not disagree. His court becomes a stage where logic is both worshipped and mutilated. Some nights he orders all candles to be extinguished and speaks in the dark, believing it sharpens the mind. Other nights, he weeps openly before his advisors, lamenting the stupidity of the people who fail to understand his vision. You watch. All of this not with anger anymore, but with a strange numbness. You've seen this story before, haven't you? In a different form, under a different name. Aladdin's paranoia turned out, word against enemies, traitors, the world. Muhammad's paranoia turns inward against doubt, against dissent, against failure, and yet, the results are the same. Crumbling roads, hungry mouths. Revolts too numerous to suppress. The Sultanate, once stretched from the Himalayas to the southern seas, begins to fragment. Governors declare independence. Armies defect. Delhi stands alone, bloated and brittle. By the year 1351, Muhammad bin Tughlaq falls ill during a campaign. In Thatta, in modern-day Sindh, fevered, disoriented, and surrounded by rebellion, he dies. Some say he was poisoned. Others say it was simply exhaustion. Either way, he exits not with triumph, but with silence. And the man who once dreamed of uniting the world through knowledge leaves behind only confusion. You return to Delhi, half expecting mourning, chaos, or celebration. Instead, there is quiet resignation. The people have already moved on. You walk past the Qutb complex, past the old Khilji mosque, and notice how the weeds have claimed the stone. A parrot calls from the minaret. A beggar sits where generals once planned campaigns. Life continues. That, perhaps, is the final truth. Empires fall, dynasties dissolve. Visionaries lose control of their own dreams. But the people endure. And, in the alleys of Delhi, among the dust and the jasmine, they tell stories. Some speak of Aladdin Khilji with awe. Others curse Muhammad bin Tughlaq with bitterness. But most just nod and say, it was a strange time. And you keep walking, because the story isn't over. It never is. Empires may die, but history just turns the page. Asterisk, asterisk. You walk the streets of Delhi, now under the heavy sky of transition, and you start to feel at that eerie silence that only arrives when one storm has passed and another waits just beyond the horizon. The city doesn't know whether to breathe or hold its breath. After the death of Muhammad bin Tughlaq, Delhi resembles a house where too many doors have been slammed shut and too many windows left open. Dust drifts through the marble archways of once glorious palaces. The air smells not of death, but of fatigue. You can tell people are tired of reform, tired of ideas, tired of leaders who dream too much and bleed them dry. Enter Firuz Shah Tughlaq, Muhammad's cousin, summoned not as a savior, but as the only man left standing who doesn't terrify everyone. He arrives like a sensible pair of shoes after decades of embroidered madness, and you can feel Delhi exhale. For once, the empire doesn't demand vision, it just wants survival. Firuz obliges. If Muhammad bin Tughlaq ruled by abstraction, Firuz rules by restoration. He cancels uncollectible taxes, reduces punishments, and focuses on public works canals, rest houses, gardens, and mosques. You walk past new wells dug in dusty corners of villages and think, maybe this one knows how to build without burning. Firuz is no great general, no philosopher king, but he is steady, and that, for now, is enough. He repairs what he can of the broken system, recognizing that sometimes just showing up and not making things worse is leadership in itself. But even in this calm, the ghost of Aladdin Khilgi lingers. People still talk about him, how he ruled, how he controlled prices, how he made Delhi the center of the universe. Historians still argue whether Firuz's era is one of peace or just prolonged inertia. The Khilji model iron-fisted, visionary, terrifying left, a mark too deep to scrub away. Even Firuz, who prides himself on leniency, can't escape comparisons. When famines strike, They remember how Aladdin rationed grain with military precision. When invasions threatened from the northwest, they recall how he built fortresses and made Delhi impregnable. Firuz, in contrast, prefers diplomacy, tribute, and appeasement, and while it works in the short term, it teaches the provinces to act with impunity. The Sultanate begins to wobble like a too-tall tower on soft ground. You ride through Punjab one summer and see governors behaving like kings, building their own armies, minting their own coins. Firuz's Delhi is safe, yes, but only because it's no longer the heart of anything. The real power is drifting outward. And Firuz himself, aging ill, childless, has no clear successor. You attend his court one afternoon, and he sits quietly beneath a carved parasol, surrounded by scholars reading texts aloud to him. He smiles gently, corrects a verse from memory, and then coughs for 5 minutes straight. No one mentions it, but everyone hears it. The years pass, and you watch the Tughlaq dynasty rot from within. Firuz tries to designate heirs, but his chosen successors die, fall ill, or are murdered. By the time he finally dies in 1388, the throne is a poisoned chair no one truly wants to sit on. Civil war follows, because of course it does. You remember how the Khiljis rose through such chaos. Now, you watch the Tughlaqs collapse into it. One ruler after another is crowned, and killed some last weeks, others months. The Sultanate becomes a broken hourglass, spilling sand faster than it can be refilled. The nobles pick sides like gamblers at a collapsing dice table. You stand outside the old Khilji fort one evening and listen to two soldiers argue over who the current sultan is. Neither of them is sure. Neither of them cares. And that's the worst sign of all. Then, as if summoned by history itself to close this weary chapter, a storm gathers from the north. You've heard the name before, whispered in the markets, scribbled in foreign letters, spoken by travelers with fear in their eyes. Tamerlane, the scourge of God. You first see his banners on the horizon, blood-red, flapping like hungry tongues in the wind. His army moves like a plague across the Indus, sacking cities, burning libraries, beheading resistance. He's not here to rule. He's here to remind you that history has teeth. Delhi, undefended, leaderless, and spiritually hollow, braces itself. Timur doesn't lay siege. He simply walks in. On December 17, 1398, the city falls without ceremony. What follows is not a conquest, but an execution. Entire neighborhoods are wiped out. The Yamuna runs red. You hide in the ruins of an old mosque and hear the screams. Later, when you emerge, the city smells like iron and ash. The Khilji palaces already. Ghosts are now tombs. Timur leaves with elephants, treasure, slaves. He has no interest in staying. For him, Delhi was never a prize. It was a warning. A historical punctuation mark that says, this could happen to anyone. When he departs, the Tughlaq dynasty is still technically alive, but it breathes like a dying fire in a wet forest, hissing, flickering, about to drown. You travel across the plains in the months that follow and hear people speak of the past like a rumor. The name Khilgi is now both curse and compliment. Some remember Aladdin as the last true ruler. Others spit when they hear his name, but all agree on one thing, that something broke after him. That his rule was the peak, and everything since has been a slow slide into forgetting. You sit by the Yamuna one twilight, watching boats pass, and wonder if empires die like people, do not with war or betrayal, but with too much memory. You think of Aladdin's obsessions, Muhammad's madness, Firuz's repairs, and Timur's carnage. And you begin to suspect that maybe it's not just bad rulers that break empires, but the ghosts of good ones, too. Delhi survives, but it doesn't shine. And you, now older, quieter, sadder, realize you've watched an entire civilization grow old with you. The Khilji legacy is gone from the walls, but it lives in the shadows, in the cracks, and the things people do without knowing why. A price ceiling here. A military reform there. A suspicion, a silence, a dream. All echoes of a time when one man ruled not by birthright, but by sheer, unreal, asterisk. You sit now in a Delhi that feels like a faded manuscript still legible. still precious, but stained and dog-eared at the edges. The winds that once carried the scent of saffron and ambition now blow dust and uncertainty. The streets, still vibrant in their own way, no longer tremble beneath the thunder of imperial processions or the snap of royal standards. Instead, they carry footsteps that seem to tread lightly on memory, as if aware that every stone here remembers something sharp. The Khilji name hasn't been spoken aloud in court for decades, but you still hear it in whispers, in arguments, at tea stalls, in the sighs of old men leaning against mosque pillars. And now, as the 15th century begins to unfurl its own tattered banners, Delhi finds itself a kingdom without rhythm. The Tughlaq dynasty limps on in title, but it's like watching a once great lion purr weakly in its sleep, dreaming of glories it can't wake into. The sultans now reign without power, command, without obedience, and write their names on documents no one reads. You pass the royal court one afternoon and are startled by how empty it feels. Not in numbers, there are still officials, guards, scribes, but in presence, authority, like perfume, fades when not refreshed. The khans and wazirs attend out of habit, not loyalty. And above it all, the city waits. Not for prosperity, for change, for something, anything, that might jolt it awake again. And that change doesn't come from inside Delhi. It never does anymore. It comes from the peripheries, where ambition still burns in the chests of governors and warlords who no longer look to Delhi for validation. One of these men is Khizr Khan, a former Tughlaq governor in Multan, quiet but calculating, who has managed to survive the endless churn of post-Timurid chaos. When Timur left, he appointed Khizr Khan as his representative, a nominal protector of Delhi, and Khizr plays his part, while biding time, observing the squabbling remnants of the Tughlaq court, waiting for the last embers to flicker out. And when they do, he doesn't march in with war elephants or fire. He arrives like a clerk with a clean notebook and simply assumes control. In 1414, the Tughlaqs officially expire, and Khizr Khan establishes the Sayyid dynasty. It's a new name, yes, but not a new energy. The Sayyids rule Delhi like reluctant landlords possessive of the land, wary of the people, and constantly checking behind them to make sure no one's sneaking up. You watch Khizr Khan closely in those early years. He's cautious, devout, and not particularly charismatic, but there's something refreshing about his lack of flair. He's not trying to dazzle anyone. He just wants the machine to keep turning. He reestablishes some law and order, tries to repair irrigation canals, deals with banditry. You get the sense that if Delhi were a wounded animal, he'd be the kind of man who wouldn't try to cure it, just bind the leg and feed it until it stood again. But power, as always, doesn't like to be quiet for too long. Kaiser's son, Mubarak Shah, inherits the throne with more ambition than caution. He wants to shine, to be remembered, and you can almost hear the ghosts of Aladdin and Muhammad bin Tughlaq whispering to him from the old palace walls. He commissions grand tombs, erects domes, and hosts lavish ceremonies. And for a while, it almost works. The court regains some color. The military wages a few small campaigns. Coins are minted with pompous titles. But Delhi is no longer the center of the world, and no amount of marble can make it so. Rebellions break out in the countryside. Afghan warlords rise. Rajput clans strengthen their holds. The empire doesn't contract anymore, it crumbles. Like dried clay falling off a cracked pot. You travel with one of the Sayyid envoys to Jaunpur, once a loyal province, now a quasi-kingdom of its own. The rulers there smile politely, but refuse to pay tribute. The envoy returns empty-handed. You ask what he'll report. That the journey was pleasant, he says with a shrug. That's the kind of diplomacy Delhi now practices, delusion wrapped in etiquette. And then, like all weak dynasties, the Sayyids begin to devour themselves. Assassinations, poisonings, power plays between brothers. The courts fill with rumor and superstition. Ministers bribe astrologers. Queens consult soothsayers. You meet one who claims to have dreamt of a golden tree growing from the ruins of the old Khilgi citadel. A sign, she says, that a true king will rise again. You don't know whether to laugh or weep. By the mid-15th century, the Sayyid dynasty has become a placeholder, a signature on a letter no one sends. Its final ruler, Alauddin Alam Shah, does something remarkable not for its boldness, but for its honesty. He voluntarily packs up and walks away from the throne. No war, no rebellion, just disinterest. He retires to Budaun and lives out his days in quiet prayer. And just like that, the Delhi Sultanate stands empty again, like a stage between performances. But Delhi does not mourn. It prepares. Because in the wings, the Lodis are waiting. You've heard their Namafghans with sharp cheekbones and sharper ambition. They've built their base in the Punjab, recruited a loyal army, and promised to restore dignity to a crown that's been worn like a borrowed hat for far too long. Bali Lodi, the first of his line, strides into Delhi not with bloodshed but with confidence. He takes the throne as if it always belonged to him. The city, starved of direction, barely resists. A new chapter begins. And yet, as you walk through the Lodi's freshly paved avenues, past guards in crisp new tunics and markets filled with hope, you feel something under your feet. A tremble, not of instability, but of memory. Of all the footsteps that came before. Of Alauddin Khilji, whose gaze once made generals sweat and merchants kneel. Of Malik Kafur, whose ambition briefly darkened the sun. Of Muhammad bin Tughlaq, who built with ideas and destroyed with certainty. The city remembers, and so do you. Because Delhi is not just a city, it's a palimpsest, a parchment scraped clean again and again, but never fully erased. The Lodis may rule now. They may stamp their name on coins and minarets, but they're writing on top of ghosts. And one day, someone will write on top of them. That's the story, isn't it? Not just of Delhi, but of every empire. Rise, rule, decay, repeat, and here you are, still watching, still walking, still listening for the next echo. Asterisk. You awaken on a spring morning to the sound of distant hammers, the clang of iron striking stone. As Lodi laborers repair a crumbling gateway in Delhi. It's not one of their own though. It's a Khilji era, arch-weathered, half-sunken, but still standing. You stand beneath it, running your fingers over the faint carvings, and think, it's funny how the past never asks permission to stay. The Lodi dynasty now governs Delhi, and yet everywhere you walk, you step over footprints that whisper of older kings, older wars, older dreams. Bola Lodi, the first of his line, has brought with him something long missing from Delhi's heart muscle. He doesn't dazzle like Alauddin, doesn't theorize like Muhammad bin Tughlaq. He is a warrior in the old sense, hands rough with callous, mind sharp with survival, a practical man in impractical times. When Balal enters court, there's no poetry or silver-tongued flattery. There's strategy, logistics, grain reports, and soldiers who would follow him into fire, because they know he slept in the dirt beside them. You can't help but respect him. After so many years of soft, indecisive sultans, Balal is a gust of cold water. He fortifies borders, stamps out rebels, and regains territory lost to arrogance and apathy. He even begins minting coins with a quiet pride, no grand titles, just the simple inscription, Balal Shah, Sultan of Delhi. And yet, even he cannot fully reclaim Delhi's former majesty. The empire no longer stretches as it once did. It breathes smaller now like a man who's been stabbed once too often and chooses to live carefully. You wander into the bazaar and see signs of prosperity again. Spices fill the air: saffron, cardamom, pepper. Artisans hum while hammering copper trays. A calligrapher writes verses on a silk scroll in golden ink. But beneath this newfound stability lies a subtle unease. Because Delhi knows it knows that stillness never lasts here. When Balal dies in 1489, the throne passes to his son, Nizam Khan, who takes the regnal name Sikandar Lodi. And if Balal was the sword, Sikandar is the scribe. Educated, well-read, a lover of poetry and architecture, he tries to shape Delhi, not with conquest, but with culture. You observe his court transform. Scholars from across the subcontinent are invited to recite verses. Persian poets walk side by side with Indian mathematicians. The royal gardens are expanded, filled with geometric designs and water channels that cool the air like silk on skin. Sikandar establishes a new capital at Agra, further south, and you follow the migration of officials and artisans like birds. Chasing a warmer season, Agra becomes his experiment cleaner, better organized. Free from the ghosts of Delhi, you stand on the banks of the Yamuna there, the river gentler than in Delhi, and admit, it's lovely, orderly, quiet, but no matter how refined the court becomes, Sikandar does not forget the sword. He campaigns constantly, extending Lodi influence over Bihar, Bengal, and central India. The Sultanate begins to breathe deeply again. You witness parades, return elephants, painted in vermilion, dancers tossing flower petals in the streets, soldiers with armor so polished it blinds in the sun. People believe again, if only briefly, that the old glory might return. But the cracks, as always, begin in the corners. Sikandar rules with an increasingly rigid orthodoxy. He bans the celebration of Hindu festivals, demolishes temples in conquered regions, and enforces a stricter interpretation of Islam than his father ever did. Scholars still argue whether he did this from genuine conviction or to assert control. What you see, though, is fear that culture alone cannot hold an empire. Fear that unless a line is drawn, disorder will seep through. And like all rulers who feared the future, Sikandar begins tightening the noose. Free thought wanes. Dissent goes underground. You meet a young poet who once performed in Sikandar's court. Now he lives in hiding, composing verses by oil lamp. One evening he recites to you a couplet. The city builds a golden wall, but nails its poets to the gate. You don't know if that's brilliant or dangerous. Probably both. And then, in 1517, Sikandar Lodi dies. The court dans white, prayers echo through both Delhi and Agra. And the throne passes to his son, Ibrahim Lodi. And this is when the tremble becomes a quake. You see, Ibrahim is young, proud, and utterly unprepared for the minefield his father left behind. He's not a bad man, necessarily. But he's erratic, suspicious, insecure. He alienates the Afghan nobles who form the backbone of his father's rule. He replaces seasoned generals with flatterers. He quarrels with his own brothers, then imprisons one. You attend court sessions where the tension is so thick, it feels like wet wool on your skin. Everyone bows, but no one trusts. The governors rebel one by one. In Bengal, in Punjab, in Malwa. The empire begins peeling like old paint, and Ibrahim, he responds with rage, executes disloyal nobles, raises taxes, sends out army after army, each more exhausted than the last. And Delhi, once again, becomes a city afraid of its own reflection. You sense it in the hush that falls when soldiers enter the bazaar. You see it in the eyes of guards stationed at old Khilji walls, unsure whether they're protecting a dynasty or waiting for its collapse. The final blow, as always, comes from outside, from the north, from Kabul, from a man whose name will reshape everything, Babur, a descendant of Timur and Genghis Khan. Babur watches Delhi from across the mountains with a mix of contempt and curiosity. He sees an empire crumbling and thinks, why not? He marches with a modest army, disciplined and small, but armed with something Delhi has never seen before. Gunpowder, real cannon fire, Turkish matchlocks, modern warfare. Ibrahim, full of fury and false confidence, marches to stop him. You ride alongside his army to Panipit in 1526. The field is vast. The sun is merciless. The mood is grim. You hear the drum beats, smell the blood before it's even spilled. The first battle of Panipit is short, sharp, and brutal. Tactics are revolutionary. He uses carts linked by chains, mobile artillery, and disciplined formations. Ibrahim's war elephants charge and are obliterated by cannon fire. The smoke rises like a prophecy. By sunset, Ibrahim Lodi lies dead on the field, pierced by multiple arrows. His body is buried in Panipit without ceremony. No poetry, no tomb, just dirt. And thus ends the Lodi dynasty. But more than that, the Delhi Sultanate, itself born with the Mamluks, sharpened by the Khiljis, stretched by the Tughlaqs, and gasped through the Soyids, and Lotus finally collapses. A new age dawns, the Mughal Empire. And you stand there, Amidst the scorched grass of Paniput, realizing you've just witnessed the curtain fall on a play centuries in the making. The actors are gone. The stage is silent. But the echoes, they'll never stop. Asterisk. You walk slowly across the battlefield of Paniput, long after the smoke has drifted away. After the crows have finished their mournful feast, and after the last of the Lodi banners has been dragged down and tossed into a cart like yesterday's laundry, the earth still remembers. It always does. Beneath your feet lie the bones of Ibrahim Lodi's final stand-a sultan, who could not hear the difference between loyalty and silence, whose fall was not just a death, but an exclamation mark at the end of an empire. Babur now sits on the throne in Delhi, and everything feels strangely familiar, yet disorientingly new. The Sultanate, in its many forms, Mamluk, Khilji, Tughlaq, Sayyid, Lodi has finally given way to something different, something foreign yet inevitable. You can almost feel Delhi holding its breath, trying to decide whether to resist this new current or surrender to it entirely. Babur doesn't rule like those before him. He is no Delhi-bred noble. He is a Chagatai Turk, descended from Timur, and Genghis Khan, with a Persian education and a Central Asian soul. He speaks of gardens, of order, of lineage and legacy, but not of Delhi with reverence. To him, this city is not holy or historical. It is strategic, useful, a starting point. And perhaps that is why, even as he claims it, you notice he doesn't trust it. He doesn't sleep in the old Khilji palaces, nor does he restore the Tughlaq forts. He builds anew slowly, cautiously, because he knows what lies beneath. The ghosts, the stories, the sand that swallows dynasties whole. You attend his court once, seated behind a curtain, listening to him dictate his memoirs. Yes, he writes memoirs, can you imagine? A king scribbling down his life like a soldier's diary. In that dry, matter-of-fact tone, he recalls Paniput, not with glee, but with calculation. He admits fear, admits loss, but also, unmistakably, admits the thrill of conquest. Babur is not pretending to be a saint. He is a conqueror, and Delhi is merely another prize on the map he carries in his head. But Delhi is tricky. It doesn't warm easily to new masters. And the city remains sullen, suspicious, like a cat that has been mishandled too many times. The nobles, especially those of Afghan descent, plot behind tall walls. The merchants hedge their bets, doing business with Mughal officers, but hoarding their real treasures. You hear rumors of rebellion from the very first-year-old Lodi loyalists, Rajput confederacies, distant governors who resent Babur's cold foreign efficiency. He wins more battles Kanwa. Gagger, but you can tell he is tired. His body aches. His heart, never fully at ease in India's thick air, longs for Kabul's sharp mountains. He confesses this, too, in his memoirs. That India is rich but unlovely, that its people are strange, that its heat is unbearable. You almost sympathize. Almost. But history does not care for comfort. And in 1530, Babur dies. His body, wrapped in royal silence, is carried not to a Delhi tomb, but to Kabul. He doesn't want to rest here. He chooses the mountains over the plains. You nod quietly at that decision. You understand. His son Human inherits the throne but not the authority. And here, the pattern returns. A new ruler, young and idealistic, trying to carry the weight of a vast, unstable empire. You watch Human's court fill with dreamers and astrologers, artists and schemers. It feels like a palace again, only without the steel. Human is kind, too kind. He dithers. He divides his territories among his brothers. And the empire, not yet anchored, begins to drift. You can feel it, even from the shadows Delhi sighs. The Rajputs rise again under Sher Khan, a clever and ruthless general who will soon become Sher Shah Suri. He defeats Humayun at Chausa, then again at Kanauj. The Mughal court flees. Delhi is lost. And now, once more, a new dynasty takes the reins, not Turkish, not Afghan, but purely Indian character. Sher Shah rules with the same decisive brutality that Alauddin Khilji once displayed, and for a moment, you wonder if this is the echo you've been waiting for. He reforms the currency, revamps the tax system, standardizes weights and measures. You watch new roads being laid, the Grand Trunk Road, stretching from Bengal to the Indus. Inns, rest stops, patrol units. The efficiency is staggering. Sher Shah is not here to impress with art or words. He builds a machine. A government that works like clockwork. His Delhi, for the brief 5 years of his reign, feels oddly familiar. Not in appearance, but in pulse. A city ruled by certainty, like it was under Aladdin. But fate, as always, interrupts. Sher Shah dies in 1545, in a gunpowder explosion during a siege. His son fails to hold the line, and Humayun, now wiser, returns from exile with Persian support, reclaims Delhi in 1555 and dies a year later. You start to feel the fatigue. Not yours, Delhi's. You sit by the Jama Masjid, near the ruins of older mosques buried under newer ones, and feel the weight of centuries pressing down like a thick quilt. The Khilji walls, the Tughlaq stones, the Soyid tombs, the Lodi gardens, the Mughal palaces, and the memories that do not vanish even when bulldozed. But just when it seems the cycle will spin again, new king, old mistakes, something changes. In 1556, a boy named Jalaluddin ascends the throne. He is 13. His name will be Akbar. And this is where the story begins to lift again, like a curtain rising after a long intermission. Akbar doesn't just rule, he reimagines, rebuilds, reinvents, and as you prepare to follow him through his rise, you realize something essential, that even though the Khiljis are gone, their ghost lingers not in names or palaces, but in the DNA of Delhi's hunger, its desire for greatness, its readiness to devour and be reborn. Because Delhi is not a city of peace, it is a city of momentum. And you, still standing quietly among its ruins and towers, are one of its few true witnesses. Asterisk. You begin to feel the wind shift again as you watch the young Emperor Akbar rise, not with a blinding explosion, but with the slow, deliberate unfolding of something vast, like the opening of a giant lotus over decades. Delhi watches him too, skeptical at first, like it always is, weary from centuries of broken promises and doomed dynasties. But this boy, this grandson of Babur, son of the too gentle Humayun, starts to glow with a different kind of fire. Not the reckless blaze of Aladdin Khilji's ambition, not the cerebral flicker of Muhammad bin Tughlaq's theories. Akbar burns with purpose and patience. You see it in his eyes the first time he rides through Delhi on horseback. He doesn't look at the crowds. He studies the buildings, the shadows, the layers of stone and ruin and half-forgotten glories. He's not just here to rule, he's here to understand. And you think, maybe this one's different. Maybe this one listens. And that's what makes him dangerous in the best way. His first few years are turbulent, of course. What throne isn't? Hemu, the Hindu general who nearly snatches Delhi back during the chaos after Humayun's death, comes within inches of ending the Mughal dream for good. You're there at the Second Battle of Panipat in 1556, when the sky is thick with dust and uncertainty, and Akbar's generals fight not just with weapons, but with the weight of history pressing on their chests. Hemu is struck in the eye by an arrow. His army breaks. Delhi is saved, but only barely. And you watch Akbar, only 13, ride through the aftermath, not with triumph, but with thoughtfulness. He doesn't bask. He calculates, learns, grows. In the years that follow, Akbar begins what you can only describe as an architectural and philosophical siege on the very idea of rule itself. He moves the capital, yes, first to Agra, then later to the city of Fetehpur Sikri. But Delhi never leaves him. Like a mirror he keeps in his pocket, reflecting all that came before. He studies the past obsessively, the Khiljis, the Tughlaqs, the Lodis. He understands where they rose and exactly how they collapsed. He won't make the same mistakes. You begin to see the slow dismantling of old feuds. The Afghan nobles who once despised Babur's foreign roots are invited back into court. The Rajput kings, who once resisted Aladdin's campaigns, are offered alliances through marriage, not war. Akbar's genius lies not just in strategy, but in empathy. He steps into the minds of his enemies and reshapes them into allies. And yet, he is not soft. You travel with his armies into Gujarat, into Bengal, into the wilds of central India. His generals move like chess pieces across the subcontinent, each one part of a larger design that even they don't fully grasp. And Akbar, he stays behind, building not just forts, but policy, systems, institutions. You remember how Aladdin tried to control prices, reform revenue, and centralize power. Akbar takes those raw, brutal attempts and turns them into functional systems. He creates an efficient land revenue model, the Anidasala, dividing regions by productivity, soil quality, rainfall. He standardizes currency. He abolishes the jizya tax on non-Muslims. One of the boldest acts of his reign, and you feel the walls of fear begin to melt across the empire. Farmers in Bengal, merchants in Gujarat, Rajput, queens in Rajasthan, they all begin to whisper the same thing. This emperor is fair, and with fairness comes loyalty. But he doesn't stop there. He creates the Dini Ilahi, a spiritual experiment that baffles everyone and yet excites the mind. A faith with no scripture, no clergy, just a philosophy of tolerance, peace, and inquiry. Historians still argue whether it was a genuine religion or just a political masterstroke. You sit in one of Akbar's nightly salonsta, Ibadat Khanadand, watch as Hindu pundits, Muslim ulama, Zoroastrian priests, and even Jesuit missionaries debate under the glow of lanterns. Akbar listens to them all, doesn't interrupt, just smiles, and then asks questions no one expects. Deep ones, quiet ones. You start to realize that while other kings built empires with swords and stone, Akbar is building one inside the minds of his people. And all the while, Delhi watches, from afar, quiet, proud, almost hopeful. Though the capital has moved, Delhi remains the soul of Hindustan. The people there still speak of the Khiljis, of Malik Kafur, of Muhammad bin Tughlaq's maddened genius. And now, they speak of Akbar too, not as a ruler, but as a phenomenon. His reforms reach them. His justice touches them. His fame, now continental, brushes every alley of the old city like a soft breeze. You return to Delhi one winter and find it changed not by conquest or decree, but by inspiration. A new madrasa has opened in Hazkas. The gardens are being replanted. Merchants speak of trade routes that extend as far as the Safavid Empire. Even the minarets seem taller somehow, as if stretching to meet the rising sun. You overhear two children playing in the street. One says, "When I grow up, I'll be Akbar's general." The other replies, "No, I'll be Akbar's poet." You smile. That's when you know something profound has shifted. Akbar's legacy isn't just etched in stone, it's being whispered into the future. And yet, he never forgets what came before. You walk with him once through the ruins of Siri Fort, where Aladdin Khilji once plotted his campaigns. He stops before a cracked wall, brushes dust from the stone, and mutters, "They built so much, but they forgot to listen." He looks at you then, eyes old and young all at once, and you understand, he sees it all. The rise, the fall, the cycle, and he has chosen to break it. Not with fire, but with wisdom. You think, maybe this is what the Khiljis dreamed of, but never achieved, a kingdom, not of fear, but of thought. And you know this, finally and fully, that you have witnessed the next great chapter in Delhi's story. That the wind has turned. That the city remembers, forgives, and begins again. Asterisk. You wake before dawn in Delhi one morning, and for the first time in years, you feel a quiet hum beneath your feet, not the tremble of unrest or the chill of fear, but the kind of deep, steady rhythm that tells you something extraordinary is being built. Not just buildings, not just armies. Something enduring. The age of Akbar has transformed the very fabric of the city, and though he rules largely from Agra and Fateh for Sikri, you see Delhi basking in the soft light of his policies, his wisdom, his sheer force of balance. The roads are smoother, the taxes more reasonable, the guards less brutish, the court more open, and most remarkably, the people, Hindu and Muslim, farmer and noble, speak of their emperor with something rare in Delhi's long memory, genuine admiration. Yet even in this warmth, the past whispers. You sit at the foot of Aladdin Khilji's old mosque, watching the pigeons flit around broken stone, and you think of how different things once were. That iron grip, that paranoia, that constant need to dominate. Akbar rules not with fear, but with participation. His court is not a cage, but a canvas. Still, no rain lasts without cracks. And as you begin to follow Akbar into the later years of his rule, you sense the careful balancing act growing heavier. The Dinyalahi never quite catches on, and some of his Muslim nobles, deeply uncomfortable with Akbar's theological experiments, begin to question his orthodoxy. There are hushed mutterings of blasphemy. You hear clerics from distant provinces frown in their Friday sermons. And yet Akbar does not retreat. He doubles down on tolerance, dialogue, and merit. He promotes Hindus to high administrative posts. He welcomes Jesuit scholars into his court. He even begins to create his own imperial cult of personality, commissioning grand portraits, large murals, and vast court records like the Akbarnamath that depict him as more than just a king, as someone divinely favored. You watch this with a mixture of awe and apprehension. It's brilliant, yes, but it's also dangerous. You remember how Muhammad bin Tughlaq believed himself intellectually superior to his own court and how that led to alienation and collapse. Akbar is cleverer than that. But power, no matter how enlightened, casts a long shadow. And the one cast by Akbar grows taller with each passing year. His son, Salim, known to history as Jahangir, begins to pull against him. You observe this quietly, from palace gardens and balcony alcoves. A prince raised in unimaginable luxury, but always just slightly in the shade of a father who shines too bright. Salim drinks, rebels, builds his own camp of advisors, even dares to crown himself prematurely. And Akbar, older now, slower, but no less sharp, sees it all. He forgives, again and again. But you can feel the wounds, not political ones, personal, deep, because no matter how vast the empire, what hurts most is when your own blood refuses your legacy. Yet Akbar never becomes bitter. You admire that most of all. He hands over power gradually, trains Salim in statecraft, marries him into powerful Rajput families. And when he dies in 1605, the empire does not collapse. It weeps. Delhi mourns, as it hasn't since Aladdin passed. But this time, it's not a mourning of fear or relief. It's of loss. Real, palpable loss. You walk through the markets that day, and hear people speak of him like a father. He listened, one old man says. He understood, says another. You think of all the rulers you've seen pass through these gates, the brutal, the mad, the meek, the ambitious, and realize none of them left behind what Akbar did, a foundation. And now Jahangir steps into that inheritance, and Delhi holds its breath again. But the transition is smoother than expected. The structures, Akbar built the bureaucracy, the revenue system, the military carry their own weight now. Jahangir, with his love of art, gardens, and justice, chooses refinement over revolution. He is not his father. He doesn't pretend to be. But he doesn't need to be either. You follow him into the heart of his court and find a man obsessed with details. He keeps a journal, the Tusakai Jahandri, where he records not just royal decrees, but the number of birds he saw, the perfume worn by a visitor, the way the moonlight hit the garden pond. This is an emperor of sensations, of balance, of show, and it works. The Mughal court becomes more lush, more colorful, more intoxicating than ever before. Delhi hosts painters from Persia, architects from Samarkand, jewelers from Central Asia. New buildings rise, inlaid with gems and verses from Persian poets. You wander into the newly built Shalimar Bog and feel as though you've stepped into a dream. Fragrant, symmetrical, quiet. Jahangir governs with a softer hand, but he is no fool. Rebellions are crushed swiftly. Corruption is punished publicly. Justice is performed dramatically. There is even a golden chain of justice outside the palace gates, where anyone can ring a bell and demand an audience with the emperor himself. You hear it ring once loud, clear, and watch as a poor man is brought into court to accuse a noble of land theft. The noble is stripped of his land by sunset, and you think, perhaps this age too has found its rhythm. But of course, nothing stays still in Delhi. Always beneath the perfume and poetry lies the heartbeat of ambition. Jahangir's wife, Nur Jahan, begins to dominate court politics. You see her in council sessions, graceful, yet sharpened, issuing orders while her husband reclines with a goblet of wine. Some nobles resent it, others respect it. You simply watch and realize. The throne, once a battlefield of men and swords, is now a theater of minds and mirrors. Then one evening, while standing atop the remnants of Aladdin, Khilji's palace now, overtaken by vines and pigeons, you think of all that has changed. The Khilji ghosts, the Tughlaq dreams, the Sayyid mistakes, the Lodi failures, they've all given way to a new order. And yet, the city is still the same. Still hungry, still restless, still sacred. And you, after all these years, are still here, the silent witness to its every rise and every crumble. Asterisk. The wind shifts again, and you feel its change first, in the silence between footsteps at court, in the rustle of silk that no longer dances as freely, in the way ministers glance sideways at each other when Jahangir is mentioned, but Nur Jahan is truly in command. Delhi, for all its grandeur, has learned to read the pauses between words. And now those pauses are growing heavier. Nur Jahan is a marvel, sharp, decisive, elegant, with a gaze that could slice stone, but even she cannot hold back the tide of time. The emperor, aging and increasingly absorbed in pleasure, leans further into intoxication. You see him less frequently now, reclining behind jeweled screens, while music plays to an audience too polite to yawn. Power flows through Nur Jahan, but power has a way of collecting enemies. Her family, especially her brother, Asaf Khan, and her daughter from a previous marriage, Ladli Begum, become central nodes in the court's tangled web. Marriages are arranged like treaties, promotions granted like bribes. The empire doesn't crumble, it calcifies slowly, softly like marble, catching a crack. You visit Delhi's marketplaces and find them still busy. The caravans still arrive, the masons still build, but the laughter is cautious, the joy filtered. People can sense when the top begins to tremble. And tremble it does, the moment Jahangir dies in 1627. The succession is brutal, as expected. Shah Jahan, son of Jahangir, and rival to Nur Jahan's ambitions, claims the throne through a mix of steel, strategy, and raw inheritance. Delhi, once again, prepares itself for a new reign, and this time, it gets something unlike anything it has seen before. You know the name before the man, Shah Jahan, the master of marble, the poet of stone. He does not come to rule, he comes to sculpt. You step into his world, and it's as if time slows. Every building he touches becomes poetry. You watch as the red fort rises, brick by brick, like a dream hardened into structure. White marble, red sandstone, fountains that sing. In secret courtyards, walls inlaid with floral veins of jade and onyx. Delhi, once a city of mud walls and charred palaces, becomes a stage of light. You're there when the Jama Masjid opens for prayer rites, 3 great domes gleaming against the sky. Its courtyard vast enough to hold 20,000. It is more than a place of worship. It is an announcement. This, the city seems to say, is no longer Delhi of Aladdin or Timur. This is Shah Jahanabad, a new name, a rebirth, and for a while everything shimmers. The court is elegant, the policies sound. Trade flourishes. You see Persian artists working alongside Indian craftsmen, a visual language of harmony, etched across palace walls and minarets. Even the coins minted feel more graceful, the calligraphy more measured. Shah Jahan doesn't just want to rule, he wants to be remembered forever. And he will be. Just not for Delhi. For a tomb. You feel the first chill of that future when Mumtaz Mahal, his beloved queen, dies in 1631. Her death carves a silence into the emperor so deep, it echoes across continents. You see him retreat inward, wrapped in grief, so profound it becomes architecture. The Taj Mahal begins, not in Delhi, but in Agra, and slowly, like sand, slipping through fingers, you watch the emperor drift from his capital. He rules less, delegates more, trusts his sons with armies, and governors with taxes. And Delhi begins to exhale its golden breath. You walk through the bazaars, and notice the first signs a caravan delayed. A noble's house suddenly shuttered, a poet deported for a too clever verse. Nothing dramatic, just ... slippage. And in the wings, his sons begin to circle. Dara, Shako the eldest, scholarly, dreamy, obsessed with Vedantic philosophy and Sufi mysticism. Aurangzeb the younger, devout, ascetic, suspicious of anything that does not bow to his god. And others, too, all with swords and supporters. And Delhi becomes a court of whispers again. You've heard it all before. This time, though, it's worse. The empire is larger, richer, more complex. And that means when the infighting begins, it doesn't just break the palace. It breaks everything. In 1658, the War of Succession erupts. You ride alongside the armies. Watch brothers butcher brothers. See Dara Shikoh, a thinker, not a general, flee the battlefield only to be betrayed, captured, executed by his own brother. Aurangzeb wins, and Shah Jahan. He is imprisoned in Agra, left to watch the Taj Mahal from a window until his final breath. You feel Delhi grow colder that day. Not because winter has arrived, but because joy has left the palace. Aurangzeb enters with none of Shah Jahan's softness. His sword is sharp, and so is his belief. A devout, determined ruler, he bans music at court, reinstates the jizya tax, and imposes strict orthodoxy across the empire. You walk past musicians packing up their instruments. Painters leave for Persia. Scholars begin to censor their debates. Delhi still stands, still shines, but now it's quiet in the wrong way, afraid of its own echo. Yet Aurangzeb is not just austere, he is brilliant in governance. He expands the empire to its greatest territorial extent. You watch his armies reach deep into the Deccan, subduing sultanates, annexing kingdoms, pressing the empire until it touches the ocean on all sides. But you also see the cost. Rebellions erupt, the Rajputs bristle. The Marathas, led by Shivaji, rise in the west like a spark in dry grass. Sikhs resist in the north. Even Sufi orders begin to pull away from the state's embrace. Delhi remains the capital, but its glow dims, its joy fades. And once more, the pattern is clear: greatness, followed by exhaustion. Expansion, followed by revolt. Aurangzeb dies in 1707, and though he ruled for nearly 50 years, Delhi does not mourn like it did for Akbar or Shah Jahan. You hear more sighs of relief than tears. And now, the empire begins to unravel. Fast, you wander through the city in the first years after his death and feel it not just decay, but disorientation. No one knows who truly rules. His successors squabble, each weaker than the last. You think back to the Khilji collapse, the Sayyid confusion, the Lodi final gasps, and you know you've seen this before. And it never ends well. You wake one morning to the sound of hoofbeats, again not organized cavalry, not royal processions, but chaos. Men yelling in Persian and Pashto, smoke curling above the Jama Masjid, and from the eastern gates of Delhi, rumors arrive on foot. Faster than official messengers, they've come again. Not conquerors this time, but invaders. Marauders, opportunists. The empire that once ruled from Kabul to Kanyakumari is now ruled in name only. And Delhi, once the proud jewel of 100 kings, is suddenly nothing more than a ripe, bleeding fruit waiting to be torn open. It is 1739, and the man at the center of this storm is Nader Shah, the Persian warlord who marches through the decaying edges of the Mughal Empire with frightening speed. You had seen the signs. The weak emperors who followed Aurangzeb Shah, Jahandar Shah, Farrukh Siyar, each one a whimper after a roar, each one more dependent on court factions, harem intrigues, and bribes. The emperor now. Muhammad Shah called Ranjila for his passion for perfume, and poetry's no match for a man like Nader. You watch from the city walls as the Persian banners appear on the horizon, and even before the first sword is drawn, Delhi knows it has already lost. What follows is not a battle. It's a massacre. The Mughal army is crushed at Karnal with embarrassing ease, and Nader Shah rides into Delhi as though he were its architect. He sits on the peacock throne, yes, the same one Shah Jahan built, glittering with rubies, emeralds, and the Kainur diamond, and, from this perch, he looks down on a city trembling in its own skin. You try to look away, but you can't, because what comes next is unforgettable. A single rumor whispers that Nader has been assassinated leads to a flash of violence. Mughal loyalists attack Persian soldiers in the streets. A few dozen die, and Nader's response is swift, calculated, and horrifying. He orders a massacre. You hear it begin before you see it. Screams, gunfire, smoke, doors kicked in, streets running red. Nearly 20,000 Delhites slaughtered in a single day. You stand frozen beneath the Qutb Minar. And for the first time in centuries of watching Delhi's rises and falls, you truly wonder if it will ever rise again. The city becomes a grave. Nader Shah leaves with treasure so vast it takes thousands of animals to carry it: jewels, gold, coins, thrones, manuscripts, tapestries, and souls. He doesn't just loot a city, he extracts its pride. Delhi is hollowed. The emperor remains, but he is a puppet dangling from frayed threads. And you walk among the ashes, the broken shops, the shattered homes, and feel nothing but sorrow. You think back to Aladdin's markets, Akbar's gardens, Shah Jahan's masjids, all gone, or worse, mocked by what remains. And yet, somehow, the city does not die. It whimpers, it crawls, but it does not die. In the decades that follow, Delhi becomes a playground for foreign powers. The Marathas sweep in, claiming to liberate the north, but they too plunder what they can. The Rohillas, the Jats, the Afghans under Ahmad Shah Abdallah each take turns occupying, raiding, ruling. You sit in the Duanicus of the Red Fort, watching each new guardian of the empire raise his banner above the same cracked marble. If there is a paradise on earth, it is this. But paradise is far away now. The Mughal emperor, still recognized, still technically sovereign, is reduced to a ceremonial figure. Issuing farmans no one obeys, celebrating festivals no one funds, and offering rewards he no longer has. You attend one such court session in 1760. The emperor, Shah Alam II, sits expressionless, flanked by guards he doesn't command, reciting lines of poetry that sound more like prayers. You overhear him murmur, Sultanatisha Alam. As Jila to Palam, the empire of Shah Alam stretches only from Delhi to Palam, barely 10 miles. And yet, the ghosts still walk. You feel them in the breeze as you pass Humayun's tomb. You sense them near the crumbling ramparts of Tulikabad. You hear them in the rustling of leaves across Aladdin's old water tank. The city remembers, and beneath the dust, the blood, and the broken domes, the soul of Delhi whispers, not yet. Because by the late 1700s, a new player arrives. That doesn't come with cavalry or cannons, but ledgers and treaties and clerks with steely eyes. The British East India Company. You meet their officers, pale and polite, who speak fluent Persian and quote Hafiz as they sip tea. They arrive not as conquerors, but as partners. But you know better. You've seen this trick before. And, slowly, subtly, Delhi is colonized not by fire, but by contract. They place a resident in the Red Fort. They install advisors. They begin collecting taxes, training local soldiers, protecting the emperor. The irony is crushing them. Same city that once terrified the world now needs protection from itself. And yet, the old culture clings on. Poets like Mir and Ghalib compose verses that float over Delhi's crumbling rooftops, like doves searching for safe land. You sit in a mushera at Chandni Chowk and hear lines so poignant they make even the British fall silent. One couplet from Ghalib haunts you, Bazisia Tafol, Hai Dunya Mirage, Shota Hai Shaboras, Tamasha Mirage. The world is but a playground before me, day and night, a mere spectacle. It feels written for Delhi itself. A city reduced to drama, to memory, to metaphor. And yet, it lives. It always lives. Even now, with emperors dethroned and invaders enthroned, Delhi refuses to die. Like a stubborn tree growing in the cracks of a burnt courtyard, it survives, waiting, watching, because it knows one thing better than anyone: the wheel turns, always. You sit beneath the fading arch of Aladdin Khilji's old madrasa, now swallowed by vines and silence, and from here, you can almost see the outlines of every ghost that has passed through Delhi: kings and killers, visionaries and tyrants, all echoing faintly in the hot, still air, as if the stones themselves are trying to remember. What they remember now is not empire, not glory, not marble dreams, but absence and eerie stillness left behind after centuries of clamor. And you, who have wandered these alleys through reigns and rebellions, know instinctively that you are watching the slow, reluctant dying breath of a thousand-year rhythm. The Mughal Empire, once thunderous, golden, unstoppably, is now a feeble shadow cast against the trembling wall of British ambition. It is the 1800s, and the empire is still here in name. Yes, still here on paper, still robed in fading ceremony. But the substance has long since drained away. The man who wears the title of emperor now, Bahadur Shah Zafar, does so more like a retired actor pacing the ghost of his stage, draped in borrowed silks, holding court in rooms that echo more with poetry than policy. You wander through the halls of the Red Fort and see a different kind of imperial majesty, one more rooted in melancholy than might. Zafar is old, tired, inward. He does not command armies or wealth. He commands verses. His court is filled with poets and philosophers, musicians and mystics, all orbiting the last ember of something once great. You watch Ghalib recite under a lamp flickering in the monsoon breeze, and even the pigeons perched along the jurakas seem to tilt their heads in sorrow, for all its decay. This version of Delhi, the Delhi of Zafar, is still deeply alive in the way only a city on the verge of remembering can be. Yet even this quiet, crumbling dignity is not permitted to last. The British East India Company, no longer hiding behind courtly manners, tightens its grip daily. Their soldiers march with boots that crackle over memories. Their officers sit beneath punkahs fanned by servants whose ancestors once served emperors. And their reports, written in clipped English, speak of order, while dismantling history brick by brick. And yet Delhi adapts. It always does. You see noble families who once scoffed at trade, now running shops under British patronage. Muslim scholars learning English alongside their children, and Hindu merchants sending their sons to Calcutta for legal education. The lanes of Ballamaran are still lit with poetry, still alive with gossip and gazelles. But under each whispered joke, there's a tension, because Delhi knows, it always knows. Knows when the wind is turning. Knows when the storm is not yet visible, but already inevitable. You feel it in 1857. First, it's just murmurs in the bazaars, grumbles from sepoys, strange looks exchanged near cantonments, stories of greased cartridges, and religious insult. You've heard such rumors before, but this time, they don't drift away. They burn. The mutiny begins in Meerut, a spark lit by outrage, but fanned by desperation, and within days, the rebels are marching toward Delhi. You stand by the old Kashmiri gate as they arrive, not an army, not yet, but a wave of fury. Their demand is as symbolic as it is surreal. Bahadur Shah Zafar must become emperor once more, not just of Delhi, but of Hindustan. And in that moment, you realize something powerful and tragic. The rebels are not fighting for the future. They are fighting for a past they never lived, but long for anyway. A golden age painted in poetry and longing. Zafar, bewildered, aged, barely more than a whisper, is dragged into the theater of rebellion. He does not lead it. He barely agrees to endorse it. But endorse it he does, if only because history has left him no graceful exits. Delhi erupts into defiant, chaotic freedom. The British are expelled, their buildings ransacked, their flags torn, and for a few feverish weeks, you feel something astonishing, the pulse of Delhi beating in defiance once more. Flags fly from Mughal bastions, decrees are issued from the Diwania, and though the city's organization is a mess, its conviction is thunderous. It's not an empire, it's a memory on fire. But memory alone cannot hold a city. The rebels are uncoordinated, undersupplied, and often divided. Leadership squabbles, military missteps, and lack of discipline erode what little advantage they have. The British regroup, and they return with a fury no Mughal has ever unleashed. The siege of Delhi begins, long, bloody, unrelenting. You feel it in your bones as the shells fall daily, reducing towers to rubble and gardens to graveyards. Kashmiri Gate, where once Aurangzeb rode in triumph, now becomes a ruin of resistance. Starvation sets in. Disease spreads. The poetry dries up. the cries begin. When the British breach the city's walls in September, the retribution is apocalyptic. They do not come to retake. They come to punish. You walk through lanes where thousands are dragged from homes and executed without trial. You see mosques turned into barracks, temples defaced, and libraries burned. The British call it reinstating order. You know it as vengeance wrapped in law. The city becomes a corpse. Bahadur Shah Zafar is captured, not as a ruler, but as a relic. His sons are executed, their bodies displayed in public to break whatever spirit remains. Zafar himself is exiled to Rangoon, where he will die in obscurity, scrawling his pain into couplets that will become the final epitaph of the Mughal line. His most famous verse, inked with hopelessness, drifts across Delhi like ash from a funeral pyre, Kitna Hai, But Nasebe, Dafin Kalai, Dugaz, Zaman, Bina Mili Kuyar Main. How unfortunate is Zafar, that even for burial, he could not find 2 yards of earth in the land of his beloved. The British abolish the Mughal dynasty entirely. The Red Fort becomes an army office. Urdu is sidelined. The very word Mughal is expunged from schoolbooks. But the soul of Delhi, bruised and buried, begins imperceptibly to grow again. Beneath the grief, the rage, the ruin, new shoots emerge. You hear them in secret poems, in a schoolteacher's lesson whispered in the corner of a Haveli, in a mother teaching her child the old stories in defiance of silence. Delhi doesn't forget. It waits. It gathers breath. The British will later declare Delhi the capital of India in 1911, building New Delhi beside the wreckage, drawing white avenues through scarlet wounds. But even those imperial facades cannot silence the resonance of Aladdin's domes, Akbar's pillars, Shah Jahan's marble, or Zafar's broken couplets. And you, the eternal witness, understand something deeper than history. A city does not end when its kings fall. It ends when its people forget. And Delhi never forgets. How unfortunate is Zafar, indeed, that he could not find even 2 yards of earth in the land of his beloved. You stand beside the Red Fort gates as the British soldiers haul him away in a bullock cart. Not with majesty, but mockery, not as an emperor, but as a footnote. His white beard trembles in the dusty wind, his eyes hollow, not from age alone, but from the weight of betrayal, of a legacy lost and love turned to ash. He glances once at the Yamuna River, where once processions had rippled its banks with music and marigolds, and you sense that Delhi has finally exhaled, not in peace, but in resignation. The empire's gone. Not conquered in one night, but in 1,000 slow cuts, ending not with the trumpet of war, but with the clink of colonial boots on marble floors. The British take full control now. The Mughal dynasty is officially dissolved. The emperor's descendants are scattered, imprisoned, or executed. The Red Fort becomes a British barracks. Delhi becomes a province in a foreigner's empire. The peacock throne melted down. The Kohinoor sent to London. History is no longer being written in Persian or Arabic or Sanskrit. It's written in stiff English by men in stiff collars, drawing straight lines across ancient contours. You sit at the Qutb complex, now labeled as an archaeological site, and watch English tourists marvel at the calligraphy on the minaret, unaware that their boots are crushing the dust of sultans. Even the city's rhythm changes. Roads are renamed, gardens redesigned, temples and mosques repurposed, some destroyed. The very language of the city is rewritten. Urdu begins to be replaced by Hindi and English. Persian vanishes from the schools. The Delhi of Aladdin, of Akbar, of Shah Jahan flickers, fades, and folds into the margins of colonial files. But Delhi is never truly gone. She folds into herself like a wounded queen, quiet but not defeated. You walk through Chandni Chowk, now lined with British shops, yet in its alleys you still hear a bit of Ghalib's sarcasm, a line of Wali's verse, or the rhythm of an old qawwali wafting from a hidden courtyard. In the tomb of Hazrat Nisamuddin, dervishes still spin. The people adapt, they always have. You see Hindu merchants, who now speak English fluently, Muslim nobles who take up clerical posts under the Raj, and Sikh traders who use the telegraph like magic. And yet deep down the pain of the fall remains. You see it in the way old men sigh before beginning a story. Once, we had kings. You hear it in the bitterness of poets, who now rhyme in rebellion. You feel it in the soil, in the bricks, in the bones. The British will make Delhi their capital in 1911, building New Delhi beside the old ruins. Broad boulevards, parliament buildings, Viceroy's house. They will pretend it's a fresh start, but you know it's just another layer on a city that cannot forget, because this city or city does not run in straight lines. It loops, doubles back, collapses, and rises again. It devours conquerors and mourns poets. It feeds tyrants and buries them with equal resolve. It is not one city, it is many cities, stacked like ancient scrolls waiting to be read, burned, and rewritten. As you walk through what remains of a Khilji's Delhi, the broken pillars, the fragments of Persian inscriptions, the dried-up tanks, you realize his empire, like all empires, was not lost in battle alone. It was lost in forgetting, in arrogance, in the refusal to listen, and yet his shadow remains. You see it in the stone patterns of later forts, in the echoes of centralized reforms, in the military ambitions of every ruler that came after. Akbar read about him. Aurangzeb remembered him. Even the British studied him. Because to rule Delhi, you must understand its ghosts. You, the silent witness 2 centuries, now watch Delhi sleep again. Not peacefully, but warily. The sun sets behind Safdarjung's tomb, casting long shadows across Lodi gardens. And in that fading light, you smile. Not because it's over, but because it never is. This city will rise again. Different name, different tongues, same heart. It always does. So now, as the sounds of Delhi quiet into the distance, let your thoughts gently fold, like the petals of a jasmine flower at dusk. Imagine the wind brushing softly through old Mughal courtyards, stirring forgotten whispers into the crevices of sandstone. Let your mind wander through arched doorways, across marble floors kissed by moonlight, and past crumbling walls where vines and history entwine in patient silence. You've walked with emperors, dined beside poets, and stood in the shadows of rebels and kings. You've seen marble dreams rise, and empires fall, and still, Delhi breathes slowly, deeply, endlessly. The city may wear scars, but it carries them like jewels, each crack, a testament to resilience. Each ruin, a verse in an endless poem. So tonight, sleep with the memory of the Ymuna's quiet flow beside towering minarets, of birds nesting in domes once gilded with gold, and of a city that refuses to be forgotten. Let the cadence of the centuries lull you into rest, and if you dream, may you dream of markets lit by oil lamps, of hushed poetry beneath fig trees, and of the soft echo of sandals on ancient stone. The city is still there, waiting just behind your eyelids. Close your eyes now. Let the story rest. Sweet dreams.